I stood frozen behind the conference room door, hearing my mother's voice pierce through. Easter is just a disappointment. 28 years old and still pretending to be something she's not. My father's agreement cut deeper. Their biggest client, Mr. Whitfield, murmured sympathetically. My hands trembled as I gripped the private jet terminal access card in my pocket. They had no idea their failed daughter owned the aviation company about to close their firm's most important deal. Tomorrow would change everything. The mahogany-paneled conference room of Blackwood Investment Partners had witnessed my parents rise to prominence in Denver's financial district, but it had also been the stage for my countless humiliations. As I stood there, memories flooded back of growing up in Cherry Hills Village, where success was measured in stock portfolios and country club memberships. My parents, Margaret and Robert Blackwood, had built their investment firm from a small office into a powerhouse managing over $2 billion. They were the golden couple of Denver's elite business circles, hosting charity galas and serving on boards of prestigious organizations. To the outside world, we were the perfect family living in a 7-bedroom colonial with mountain views. But perfection came with a price I could never afford to pay. From the time I could walk, my parents had my life mapped out. I would attend the finest schools, major in finance at an Ivy League university, and join the family firm. They even had my future office picked out corner suite on the 15th floor with a view of the Rockies. The problem was, I loved airplanes. While other 6-year-olds played with dolls, I built model aircraft. When classmates dreamed of becoming doctors or lawyers, I memorized flight patterns and studied aerodynamics. My bedroom ceiling was covered with glow-in-the-dark constellation maps, and I could identify every commercial aircraft by its engine, sound alone. My parents tolerated this obsession as a phase. Surely their daughter would outgrow this fascination with machines and grease and noise. They enrolled me in tennis lessons and debutante training, hoping to redirect my interests toward more acceptable pursuits. Everything changed when I was 16. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, needed someone to help with bookkeeping at Centennial Airport's small charter service. My parents agreed, thinking exposure to the business side might cure my aviation dreams. Instead, it ignited them. Working at that tiny airport operation, I discovered I had an unusual talent. I could look at flight schedules, maintenance rotations, and fuel costs and immediately see patterns others missed. I streamlined their dispatch system, reducing delays by 40%. I negotiated better fuel contracts, saving thousands monthly. The owner, Jack Morrison, said I had the sharpest operational mind he'd encountered in 30 years of aviation. But when I excitedly shared these achievements at dinner, my mother's fork paused mid-air. "That's nice, dear, but when are you going to focus on real business?" Real business, as if keeping aircraft safely in the sky wasn't real, as if the millions of people who depended on aviation daily weren't real. The comparison to Stephanie Chen began that same year. Stephanie was the daughter of my parents' business partner, Richard Chen. 1 year older than me, she embodied everything my parents wanted in a child. She wore pearls instead of pilot wings, discussed market trends instead of weather patterns, and never had grease under her fingernails from helping with engine maintenance. Stephanie got into Wharton. My mother would announce at dinner. Stephanie is interning at Goldman Sachs. Stephanie just got engaged to that lovely banker from Connecticut. Each announcement was a dagger wrapped in a smile, a reminder of who I was supposed to be. When college application time arrived, I knew what I wanted. The University of Colorado had one of the best aerospace engineering programs in the country. I could stay close to home while pursuing my passion. My parents had other ideas. "We're not paying $30,000 a year for you to play with toy planes," my father declared, sliding the Ivy League brochures across his mahogany desk. "You'll major in business. This aviation nonsense ends now." I stared at those glossy brochures featuring students in suits standing before trading screens. That would be my prison uniform if I surrendered to their vision. "Then I'll pay for it myself," I said quietly. My mother laughed, the sound sharp as breaking crystal. "With what money? Your little airport job?" "With scholarships, with loans, with work." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face darkened to the shade of the burgundy leather chairs he loved so much. "If you pursue this foolishness, you'll do it entirely alone," he said. "No support, no trust fund, no backup plan when you fail." "I won't fail." My mother stood smoothing her designer skirt. "You already have." That night, I filled out my application to CU Boulder by lamplight, my hands steady despite the tears. I would prove them wrong, though I didn't yet understand that success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. 4 years later, I graduated with honors. My parents didn't attend the ceremony. They told their society friends I had dropped out after one semester, too proud to admit failure. They painted a picture of their wayward daughter drifting through life, unable to commit to anything substantial. The truth was far different. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in aerospace engineering and a minor in business operations. I worked 3 jobs to pay tuition, studied in airport break rooms, and submitted my senior thesis on optimizing private aviation logistics while running on 2 hours of sleep. Professor Williams, my advisor, called it the most innovative work he'd seen in a decade. Industry professionals who reviewed it offered me positions on the spot. But to my parents, I simply didn't exist anymore. The twist of the knife came at my cousin's wedding 6 months after graduation. I overheard my parents talking to relatives in the garden, their voices carrying over the string quartet. "Such a shame about Easter," Aunt Patricia murmured sympathetically. "Margaret told me she dropped out of college." "We tried everything," my mother replied, her voice thick with practiced sorrow. "Some children just can't find their way." "Still living at home?" Uncle Charles asked. "Oh, no," my father interjected quickly. "She's finding herself. You know how young people are these days." Finding myself. I was working 18-hour days to launch my own aviation company, sleeping on a cot in a borrowed hangar, eating peanut butter sandwiches for every meal to save capital. But in their narrative, I was a cautionary tale about parental disappointment. I left the wedding early that night, driving back to the airport where my real life waited. In the quiet hangar surrounded by the aircraft I was learning to manage, I made myself a promise. One day my success would speak louder than their lies. I had no idea how soon that day would arrive, or how sweet vindication would taste when served at 30,000 feet. The 18 months after graduation tested every ounce of determination I possessed. While my former classmates settled into comfortable corporate jobs with signing bonuses and company cars, I was building something from nothing in the shadows of Denver's aviation industry. My first office was a converted storage closet at Centennial Airport, barely large enough for a desk made from sawhorses and plywood. The walls were thin enough to hear every takeoff and landing, which suited me perfectly. I incorporated Ether Aviation Services, with $300 scraped together from plasma donations and overtime shifts. The name came to me during a particularly brutal double shift cleaning aircraft cabins. Ether, the mythological upper air breathed by the gods. It represented everything I wanted my company to embody, rising above reaching heights. Others couldn't imagine breathing rarefied air. My parents would have called it pretentious. I called it prophetic. Working 3 jobs wasn't a choice. It was survival. Monday through Wednesday, I dispatched flights for a cargo company from midnight to 8 in the morning. Thursday and Friday, I cleaned private jets for a detailing service. Weekends meant 12-hour shifts at the FBO, fueling aircraft and coordinating ground services. Every spare moment between was dedicated to building my business plan and making connections. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I perfected the art of 20-minute power naps in break rooms and learned to function on 4 hours of rest. Airport coffee became my lifeblood, terrible and burned, but keeping me upright. I showered at the 24-hour gym near the airport my membership paid for by cleaning the owner's Cessna monthly. My wardrobe consisted of 2 professional outfits rotated endlessly and washed in airport bathroom sinks when necessary. I learned to steam wrinkles out with the hand dryers and keep my appearance professional, despite living like a nomad. Image mattered in aviation, even when that image was held together with safety pins and determination. The loneliness was perhaps the hardest part. My college friends were building their lives in conventional ways, sharing apartment horror stories and first job adventures. I couldn't relate to their complaints about boring meetings or annoying coworkers. My meetings happened at 3 in the morning with cargo pilots, and my coworkers were the ghosts of my own ambition. Family dinners became exercises in endurance. Once a month, my parents would summon me to their Cherry Hills home, not out of love, but obligation. These gatherings followed a predictable script that grew more painful with each performance. Easter's here. My mother would announce to whatever guests they'd invited her, tone suggesting I was an unexpected weather event rather than their daughter. She's between opportunities at the moment. Between opportunities, their euphemism for failure. They would seat me at the far end of their massive dining table, physically and emotionally distant from the main conversation. While they discussed market trends and investment strategies with their guests, I would push food around my plate and count the minutes until escape. The worst part was the pity. Their friends would glance at me with those sad, understanding looks reserved for problem children and failed investments. My mother would skillfully steer conversations away from careers when I was present, as if my very existence was an embarrassment to be managed. Stephanie Chen just made vice president at Morgan Stanley. My mother mentioned during one particularly brutal dinner. 26 years old, remarkable girl. The unspoken comparison hung in the air like smog. I was 23, sleeping in airport lounges and eating vending machine dinners, remarkable in all the wrong ways. What they didn't know was that I'd just secured my first real contract. A tech startup called Nexus Industries needed emergency charter services for their executives. Every major operator had turned them down because of their demanding schedule and limited budget. I saw opportunity where others saw hassle. Working 20-hour days, I coordinated with 3 different charter operators, negotiated bulk fuel rates, and created a scheduling system that cut costs by 35% while meeting every requirement. The Nexus CEO, David Kim, was so impressed he signed a 6-month exclusive contract on the spot. We see that contract was worth $40,000 in commission. Not a fortune, but enough to rent actual office space and hire my first employee. I wanted to share this victory with my parents to prove I was building something real, but I knew they'd dismiss it as lucky accident or temporary success. Everything changed the day I met Captain Gloria Harrison. Gloria was a legend in aviation circles. First black female captain for a major carrier. She'd broken barriers and shattered ceilings throughout her 40-year career. Now retired from commercial aviation, she ran a small charter operation and mentored young pilots. I was refueling her King Air when she noticed my company logo on my coveralls. Ether Aviation Services, she read aloud, that your company— Yes, ma'am, I replied, tightening the fuel cap. How old are you? 23. She studied me with eyes that had seen everything from clear skies to catastrophic storms. You're the one who saved Nexus Industries bacon last month. Word traveled fast in aviation. I coordinated their charter needs, yes. David Kim says you're the sharpest operations mind he's encountered. Says you see solutions where everyone else sees problems. I focused on my work, unsure how to handle praise from someone I'd idolized since high school. I could use someone like you, Gloria continued. I've got more charter requests than I can handle, but I'm terrible at the business side. Interested in a partnership? My hand stilled on the fuel hose. I'm not sure I'm ready for something that big. Gloria laughed, rich and warm. Child, nobody's ever ready. That's why they call it taking off, not staying grounded. That conversation led to a mentorship that transformed my business. Gloria didn't just open doors. She showed me there were doors I hadn't even known existed. She introduced me to the right people, taught me to navigate aviation politics, and most importantly, believed in me when no one else did. Under her guidance, Ether Aviation Services grew from a single-person operation to a legitimate business. We specialized in solving complex charter problems others wouldn't touch. Difficult routes, challenging schedules, demanding clients. We handled them all with innovative solutions and flawless execution. The twist came 6 months later. I was reviewing contracts in my new office, a real space with windows and a door that locked, when Gloria burst in, waving a newspaper. "You see this?" She slapped the business section on my desk. The headline read, "Blackwood Investment Partners loses cornerstone client in stunning reversal." My parents' firm had lost Wellington Industries, a multi-billion-dollar account they'd managed for 15 years. The article cited poor communication and outdated strategies as reasons for the departure. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, though my heart was already racing. Gloria grinned. "Because Martin Wellington just called. He's looking for innovative partners for his new venture. Specifically mentioned wanting to work with hungry young companies that think outside traditional boundaries. He'll never work with me once he learns who my parents are." Already knows, doesn't care. In fact, Gloria's grin widened. "He specifically asked if you were the same Easter Blackwood whose parents had been bad-mouthing at industry events. Seems he values determination over pedigree." That afternoon, Martin Wellington became my first major investor, putting $2 million into Ether Aviation Services. The man my parents lost because of their arrogance chose to bet on the daughter they'd written off as a failure. I didn't tell my parents. They would find out eventually, but for now, my success remained my secret. Every contract signed, every milestone, reached every barrier, broken, happened in shadows they'd never think to search. Building in darkness taught me to appreciate light. Working in silence taught me the value of voice. Being dismissed taught me to never dismiss others. As I signed the investment papers, Gloria watching with pride, I realized something fundamental. My parents thought they'd cut me off from success by withdrawing their support. Instead, they'd freed me to define success on my own terms. The girl they called a disappointment was building an empire. They just didn't know it yet. The invitation arrived on expensive stationery, my mother's perfect penmanship, making each word feel like a calculated strike. "Your presence is requested at a dinner party, honoring potential investors in the Blackwood Legacy Fund." No mention of family, no warmth, just a formal summons I couldn't ignore without causing the kind of scene my parents would use as ammunition for years. I stared at the invitation in my office, now a proper executive suite at Centennial Airport. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched a Gulf Stream execute a perfect landing. 3 years after graduation, Ether Aviation Services managed a fleet of 12 aircraft and employed 30 people. That very morning, I'd signed our biggest expansion deal, yet $50 million to establish operations at 6 major airports across the western United States. The timing of my mother's invitation wasn't coincidental. She had a sixth sense for my achievements, always choosing to twist the knife when I felt strongest. I'd learned to recognize the pattern. Every time I reached a new milestone, a family obligation would materialize designed to remind me of my place in their narrative. I dressed carefully for the dinner, choosing a simple black dress that whispered rather than shouted success. No logos, no flash, nothing that would give them ammunition. My hair pulled back in a classic chignon, minimal jewelry, conservative makeup. I looked professional, but not prosperous, put together, but not proud. It was armor carefully constructed to deflect their barbs. The drive to Cherry Hills felt like traveling backward through time. Each familiar street corner held a memory of feeling insufficient, of being the square peg in my parents' round hole of expectations. The closer I got to their estate, the smaller I felt until I was gripping the steering wheel to remind myself I was 26, not 16. Their house blazed with light, every window glowing like an accusation. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. I recognized several belonging to Denver's financial elite who'd watched me grow up and fail to meet standards. I parked my modest Honda between a Bentley and a Mercedes, another reminder of the gulf between their world and mine. My mother answered the door herself, a calculated move. The help would have treated me like a guest. She wanted to establish the hierarchy from the first moment. "Easter," she said, air kissing past my cheek. "So glad you could make it, though I do wish you'd done something about—" She gestured vaguely at my entirety. "Well, you're here now." The foyer smelled of lilies and wealth, that particular combination of expensive flowers and subtle perfume that marked houses where appearance mattered more than comfort. Voices drifted from the main dining room, punctuated by the kind of laughter that came from confidence rather than joy. "Before we go in," my mother said, adjusting my perfectly straight necklace, "please try not to embarrass us. These are important people. If anyone asks about your situation, just say you're between opportunities. We've told them you're exploring your options." Exploring my options. I'd just come from finalizing contracts that would create over 100 jobs, but in her story, I was still wandering lost. The dining room was a stage set for their performance. 20 guests arranged around the mahogany table that had witnessed so many of my failures. Crystal glasses caught candlelight, casting rainbows on walls lined with my father's diplomas and deal tombstones. No photos of me, of course. Those had been relegated to a drawer somewhere, evidence of the child who didn't fit the narrative. "Everyone Easter's here," my mother announced with false brightness. "She's between things at the moment." The pause before "between things" was deliberate, inviting speculation. Faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from pity to curiosity. I recognized most of them titans of Denver's business community who'd watched my parents' rise and my apparent fall. "Easter, dear, sit there," my mother directed, pointing to a seat near the kitchen door, the children's table positioned despite no other children present. "Stephanie and Bradley will be sitting beside you." Of course, Stephanie Chen had evolved from my parents' favorite comparison to their chosen surrogate daughter. She entered moments later on the arm of Bradley Morrison, her investment banker fiancé, whose pedigree read like my parents' wish list. Harvard MBA third-generation wealth, the kind of jaw that belonged on currency. "Easter," Stephanie exclaimed with genuine warmth that made the situation worse. She'd always been kind, which made being measured against her feel like being beaten with silk scarves. "It's been too long. How are you?" Before I could answer, my mother interjected. "Easter's still finding herself. You know how it is." She turned to the table at large. "Stephanie just made partner at Chen Blackwood, youngest in the firm's history." Murmurs of approval rippled around the table. My father raised his glass in toast to Stephanie's achievement, the pride in his eyes cutting deeper than any direct insult. This was the daughter he'd wanted sitting at his table in proxy. "What exactly are you doing these days, Easter?" Bradley asked, his tone suggesting he was throwing coins to a beggar. I opened my mouth to speak truth, to shatter their assumptions with facts about my company, my employees, my success. But my mother's warning glance froze the words. This wasn't about me. It was about them, their image, their story. "I work at the airport," I said simply. "How interesting," Bradley replied, the pause making clear it was anything but. "Doing what exactly?" "Various things." My mother laughed, the sound like champagne flutes breaking. "She's always been drawn to simple pursuits. Remember when she wanted to be a pilot?" She shook her head at the absurdity. "We tried to explain that wasn't a career for people like us." "Nothing wrong with having dreams," Mr. Patterson said kindly. He'd known me since childhood, watched me build model planes in his backyard. "What happened with that Easter?" "Reality." My father answered for me. "Dreams are fine for children, but adults need direction, purpose. Easter's still learning that lesson." The courses came and went, each accompanied by commentary on my failures, my lack of presence at charity galas, my absence from the society pages, my persistent refusal to date anyone from their approved list. Every observation felt like another weight added to my shoulders. "Maybe she could work for you, Stephanie," my mother suggested over the fish course. "You must need assistance, someone to answer phones." "I'm sure Easter has her own plans," Stephanie said diplomatically. "If she did, we'd have heard about them by now," my father countered. 26 and still playing at airports. At some point, potential becomes procrastination. Speaking of airports, Mrs. Wellington said, "Did you hear about that new aviation company that just secured the Nexus Industries contract? Quite impressive for such a young firm." My pulse quickened, but I kept my eyes on my plate. Probably some tech money playing with toys. My father dismissed. These startups burn bright and flame out. Real business requires patience, tradition, foundation. Actually, Mr. Patterson said slowly, I heard the founder is quite brilliant. Gloria Harrison speaks very highly of her. Gloria Harrison. My mother's nose wrinkled. That woman who thinks flying planes is a suitable career. No wonder she'd promote such nonsense. The conversation shifted, but damage was done. They dismissed my mentor, my company, my entire existence, without knowing they spoke about me. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing space to breathe. In the hallway, I passed my father's study. The door stood open, revealing his wall of achievements. Framed deals, photos with dignitaries, evidence of the success he'd defined so narrowly. On his desk, I glimpsed a folder labeled Legacy Fund Prospects. My parents were raising money for a new investment vehicle, hoping to capitalize on their reputation. I returned to find dessert being served and Bradley regaling the table with stories of his latest acquisition. Stephanie watched with appropriate admiration while my mother beamed as if he were her own son. This was the life they'd scripted for me, being decorative support to someone else's ambition. Easter's always been our creative one, my mother said when conversation lulled. Remember when she wanted to study aerospace engineering? We had to explain that wasn't practical. Some children need more guidance than others. I did study aerospace engineering, I said quietly. Silence fell like a curtain. You... what? My mother asked. I graduated with honors 3 years ago. My father's face darkened. We've discussed this fantasy before. It's not a fantasy. I have the diploma, the transcripts, the job offers I turned down to start my company. Company, Bradley laughed. What company? Before I could answer, my mother stood. Easter's tired. It's been a long day of whatever she does. Perhaps you should go. The dismissal was clear, but something had shifted. One guest, someone I didn't recognize, watched me with unusual interest. He'd been quiet all evening, observing rather than participating. As I gathered my coat, he approached. Ether Aviation Services, he said quietly. That's you, isn't it? I froze. He smiled. I read about you in Forbes. 30 under 30 in aviation. Impressive work. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me stunned. Someone at my parents' table knew exactly who I was, what I'd built, but he'd stayed silent, letting them perform their ritual humiliation. I drove away from Cherry Hills with tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from rage. They'd reduced me to a punchline while I'd been signing deals that would change lives. They'd offered me crumbs while I was building a feast. In my apartment, I found the Forbes issue he'd mentioned. There I was, professional and proud, under the headline, "The Sky's the Limit, Young Entrepreneurs Revolutionizing Aviation." The article detailed my company's innovative approaches and rapid growth. My parents had a subscription to Forbes. It sat on their coffee table like a Bible, but they'd never seen their daughter in its pages because they'd already decided who I was. That night, I made a decision. No more family dinners. No more submitting to their narrative. The next time they saw me, it would be on my terms in my territory. They wanted to believe I was a failure. Let them. Success, I was learning, was sweeter when served as surprise. 3 weeks after the humiliation dinner, my assistant Sarah burst into my office with barely contained excitement. Her usually composed demeanor had given way to something approaching glee, which immediately put me on alert. Sarah had worked with me for 2 years and had seen everything from emergency medical flights to celebrity meltdowns. Very little fazed her anymore. "You're never going to believe who just called," she said, closing the door behind her. I looked up from the expansion contracts I'd been reviewing. We were in the final stages of establishing our Phoenix hub, and every detail required attention. The president... Close. Whitfield Industries. They need comprehensive aviation services for a global acquisition, the kind of thing only we can handle. My pen stopped moving. Whitfield Industries was the whale every aviation service dreamed of landing. Marcus Whitfield had built a multinational empire through strategic acquisitions, and his travel needs were legendary. Multiple continents, tight timelines, absolute discretion required. They called us directly, I asked. Better. They called 6 companies. 5 already turned them down because of the complexity. We're literally their last hope. Sarah's smile widened. But here's the beautiful part. Guess who's been managing their investment portfolio? The pieces clicked into place like a perfectly executed landing. Blackwood Investment Partners. Your parents have been courting Marcus Whitfield for 3 years. This acquisition could make or break their legacy fund launch. Sarah placed a folder on my desk. They desperately need someone to handle his aviation logistics, and we're the only ones with the certifications, fleet access, and expertise to pull it off. I opened the folder, scanning the requirements. Whitfield needed coordinated flights to 17 cities across 4 continents in a 10-day window. Each stop required ground transportation, secure facilities, and backup plans for weather or political disruptions. It was a logistical symphony that would challenge any operator. For us, it was Tuesday. There's more, Sarah continued. Whitfield specifically requested the company owner be present for the initial meeting. He likes to know who he's trusting with his life. When? Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. She paused for effect. At your parents' offices. The irony was so perfect, I almost laughed. My parents had spent 3 years positioning themselves as Whitfield's trusted advisors. Now their biggest client needed something only their disappointment daughter could provide. Schedule it, I said, but don't include my name in any correspondence. Use only the company name and my title. Sarah understood immediately. You want to surprise them. I want to win on merit. If they know it's me, they'll either sabotage the meeting or try to take credit. This way, Whitfield judges us purely on capability. That evening, I called Gloria for advice. She listened to the situation, then laughed long and loud. Baby girl, this is what we call divine timing, she said. You've been building in the shadows for 3 years. Time to step into the light. What if they try to undermine me when they realize? Then they show Whitfield exactly who they are. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people reveal themselves. I spent the night preparing our proposal. Every detail had to be perfect, from flight routing to catering preferences. I pulled Whitfield's travel history, analyzed patterns, identified potential pain points. By morning, I had a presentation that would make NASA jealous. The next morning, I chose my outfit with military precision. A charcoal suit that meant business understated jewelry that whispered success, shoes that could command any boardroom. I looked like money without looking like I was trying to look like money. The difference mattered. You've got this, Sarah said as I prepared to leave. Want me to come for moral support? No, this is something I need to do alone. The drive to downtown Denver felt different this time. I wasn't the failing daughter returning for judgment. I was a CEO about to close the deal of the year. The familiar streets looked smaller, somehow less intimidating when you weren't seeing them through tears. The Blackwood Investment Partners building stood like a glass monument to conventional success. I'd been here countless times as a child, forced to admire what my parents had built while being reminded I'd never measure up. The security guard didn't recognize me in my professional attire, asking for identification like any other visitor. Ether Aviation Services, I told the receptionist. We have a 2 o'clock with Mr. Whitfield. Her eyes widened. Oh yes, Mr. Blackwood mentioned you were coming. Top floor main conference room. They're very excited about your proposal. Excited, if only they knew. The elevator ride felt eternal. Each floor represented another year of dismissal, another moment of being found wanting. But when the doors opened on the executive floor, I stepped out as Easter Blackwood's CEO, not Easter, the disappointment. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy. My parents stood at the head of the table reviewing notes and adjusting presentations. They'd pulled out all the stops, fresh flowers, imported water, the works. This meeting clearly meant everything to them. The aviation people are here, someone announced. My mother turned her practiced welcome smile freezing as she saw me. The blood drained from her face so quickly, I worried she might faint. My father's reaction was more subtle, a tightening around his eyes that spoke volumes. "What are you doing here?" my mother hissed, moving toward me like she could physically remove my presence. "I have a meeting," I replied calmly. "This is not the time for your games, Easter. Mr. Whitfield will be here any moment. We cannot afford—" "Is there a problem?" Marcus Whitfield's voice cut through her panic. He stood in the doorway, every inch the billionaire titan. Silver-haired and sharp-eyed, he commanded attention without effort. His assistant and 2 other executives flanked him, all watching the family drama with interest. "No problem at all." My father recovered quickly. "Just a small misunderstanding. This is our daughter. She must have the wrong conference room." "Actually," I said, extending my hand to Whitfield, "I'm Easter Blackwood, CEO of Ether Aviation Services. We're here to present our proposal for your aviation needs." The silence that followed could have swallowed galaxies. Whitfield shook my hand, his grip firm and assessing. "The aviation company my team has been raving about. They said you were the only ones who could handle our requirements." "We specialize in complex logistics," I replied. "The more challenging, the better." My mother made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "There must be some mistake. Easter works at the airport. She's the founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing private aviation companies in the country." Whitfield finished. "Yes, I'm aware. Shall we proceed with the presentation?" The next hour was the sweetest torture of my life. I presented our proposal with perfect professionalism while my parents sat frozen, watching their narrative crumble. Every slide showcased our capabilities, our growth, our innovation. The numbers spoke louder than any family dinner dismissal ever could. "This is incredibly thorough," Whitfield said, reviewing our routing plans. "You've anticipated issues I hadn't even considered." "Experience teaches you to expect the unexpected," I replied. "We've handled similar operations for tech acquisitions, medical emergencies, and diplomatic missions. Your requirements are complex, but well within our capabilities." My father found his voice. "How long has this company existed?" 3 years. I answered without looking at him. "We started with 1 contract and have grown to a fleet of 12 managed aircraft with operations in 6 states. 12 aircraft," my mother's voice cracked, "with options on 6 more pending this contract." I turned back to Whitfield. "We can begin service immediately upon agreement." Whitfield's assistant leaned over to whisper something. He nodded, then fixed my parents with a curious look. "You must be very proud. Your daughter has built something remarkable." The lie came so easily to my father. "Of course. We've always supported Easter's endeavors." I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. "Funny," Whitfield said slowly. "That's not what you said 3 weeks ago. Didn't you describe her as a disappointment still playing with airplanes?" My mother's champagne glass would have shattered if she'd been holding one. "I must have misunderstood," Whitfield continued, "because surely parents who raised such an accomplished daughter would celebrate her success, not dismiss it." The meeting continued, but the power had shifted. My parents sat like statues while I fielded questions and refined proposals. Their biggest client was seeing behind their carefully constructed facade, and they couldn't stop it. "I think we've seen enough," Whitfield announced finally. "Ms. Blackwood, your proposal exceeds our expectations. We'd like to move forward immediately. I'll have contracts drawn up this afternoon," I promised. "Excellent. We'll need to tour your facilities, meet your team." He stood signaling the meeting's end. "Robert Margaret will need to discuss some portfolio adjustments given this new partnership. I prefer alignment between my service providers." The threat was subtle but clear. My success was now tied to their biggest client. Any move against me would be a move against him. As we prepared to leave, my mother made one last desperate play. "Easter, darling, we should celebrate. Family dinner tonight." "I'm afraid I have to oversee preparations for Mr. Whitfield's flights." I declined. Business comes first. You taught me that. Whitfield chuckled. Indeed, actions speak louder than words, don't they? I left my parents' conference room with a signed letter of intent worth $80 million over 5 years. But more importantly, I left with their biggest clients' respect and trust. They'd summoned Ether Aviation Services to solve their problem, never knowing they'd invited their dismissed daughter to demonstrate exactly what they'd missed. The twist of fate was delicious. They'd spent 3 years courting Whitfield while telling him their daughter was a failure. Now that same daughter held the key to keeping his business. Success, I realized, wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about being too valuable to ignore. The days following the Whitfield meeting passed in a blur of strategic planning and careful documentation. My legal team worked around the clock to draft contracts that protected both parties while delivering exceptional value. Every clause, every provision, every detail had to be perfect. This wasn't just another client. This was vindication written in legalese. Sarah managed communications with surgical precision, ensuring all correspondence went through corporate channels only. My name appeared nowhere except signature lines, and even those used my formal business signature that looked nothing like my personal handwriting. We were ghosts with letterhead shadows with certifications. Your parents' office has called 6 times, Sarah reported Monday morning. They're desperate to know more about our company structure and ownership. Direct all inquiries to legal, I instructed. Standard due diligence responses only. The beauty of corporate anonymity was its perfect legitimacy. Ether Aviation Services was a Delaware C corporation with properly filed documents and transparent licensing. Anyone could look up our credentials and certifications. What they couldn't easily find was the human story behind the registration numbers. That afternoon, Gloria stopped by with lunch and tactical advice. We sat in my office overlooking the runways, watching planes trace paths across clear Colorado skies, while she shared war stories from her own battles with prejudice and presumption. They're going to dig, she warned, unpacking sandwiches from her favorite deli. People like your parents don't like surprises, especially when those surprises threaten their worldview. Let them dig. Everything about this company is legitimate. I'm not talking about legitimacy, baby girl. I'm talking about ego. You've disrupted their narrative. That makes you dangerous. She was right, of course. That evening, I received word that my parents had hired a private investigator to research Ether Aviation Services. The investigator, not knowing his client's connection to me, actually called our office for an interview. Sarah scheduled him for the following week after the Whitfield contracts would be signed. The proposal itself was a masterwork of professional excellence, 60 pages of detailed logistics contingency plans and value propositions that positioned us not just as a service provider, but as a strategic partner. I included case studies from previous complex operations testimonials, from satisfied clients, and financial projections that demonstrated stability and growth. This reads like a Fortune 500 presentation. Tom Martinez, my CFO, said during our final review. Nobody would guess we started in a converted hangar. That's the point. We're competing on merit, not biography. The formal proposal meeting was scheduled for Thursday at Whitfield Industries headquarters. This time, the venue was neutral ground, a gleaming tower in downtown Denver, where decisions affecting thousands of lives were made daily. I arrived early, claiming the conference room to review technical specifications one final time. My team assembled like a special operations unit, Sarah with her tablet full of backup documentation, Tom with financial models that could answer any question, Patricia Wong, our head of operations, with real-time updates from our dispatch center, Captain Gloria herself serving as senior aviation advisor, her presence lending decades of credibility. Remember, I told them as we prepared, they don't know about my family connection. As far as anyone's concerned, we're just the best aviation service provider in the region. The best in the nation, Gloria corrected. Don't undersell what you've built. Marcus Whitfield arrived precisely on time, accompanied by his acquisition team, and to my carefully hidden dismay, my parents. They'd positioned themselves as essential to the process. their investment guidance apparently inseparable from his operational needs. "Ms. Blackwood," Whitfield greeted me warmly, "thank you for accommodating our schedule." My mother's face tightened at his familiar tone, but she maintained her professional mask. They'd clearly coached him to keep distance, warning him about the embarrassment of their underachieving daughter. What they hadn't calculated was that Whitfield made his fortune by judging people on results, not relationships. "Let's begin with safety protocols," Whitfield said, settling into his chair. "My insurance carriers have specific requirements." Patricia launched into her presentation with practiced ease. She detailed our perfect safety record, our pilot training standards that exceeded FAA requirements, our maintenance schedules that treated suggestions as mandates. Every slide reinforced our commitment to excellence. "Impressive," one of Whitfield's executives commented. "You maintain standards usually reserved for commercial carriers." "Commercial carriers transport hundreds of people who chose to fly," Gloria interjected. "We transport individuals who must fly. The responsibility is greater." My father shifted uncomfortably. He'd always dismissed aviation as blue-collar work, failing to understand the expertise required to keep humans safely airborne. Watching his biggest client nod appreciatively at Gloria's wisdom must have stung. The financial presentation came next. Tom walked through our corporate structure with transparency that bordered on audacious. Our revenue growth, our conservative debt management, our strategic reserves for weather events and economic downturns. We weren't just solid, we were fortress-like in our stability. "You're showing 40% year-over-year growth," Whitfield observed. "How do you maintain quality at that scale?" "By being selective about our growth," I answered. "We've turned down contracts that would have stretched our capabilities. Money isn't worth compromising safety or service." My mother made a small sound, probably remembering her lectures about maximizing profit at any cost. But Whitfield smiled, recognizing the long-term thinking that built lasting enterprises. "Show me the routing for the Asian segment," he requested. This was our moment to shine. The Asian portion of his acquisition tour was the most complex, involving countries, with strict aviation regulations and limited private terminal access. I pulled up our interactive mapping system, demonstrating primary routes, alternates, and contingencies for everything from typhoons to political unrest. We've pre-negotiated landing slots at every destination. I explained, zooming in on Tokyo. Our local partners have been vetted through 3-year relationships. Ground transportation is arranged with drivers who've signed NDAs. Secure communications are established through encrypted satellite systems. "This is extraordinary," Whitfield's head of security said. "You've thought of everything." "We've learned from everything," I corrected. "Each challenge we've faced has refined our procedures." For 2 hours, we dissected every aspect of our operation. My parents sat increasingly rigid as their biggest client grew increasingly impressed. They'd brought him here thinking to control the narrative, to position themselves as the wise advisors guiding him toward acceptable partners. Instead, they were witnessing their dismissed daughter demonstrate expertise they couldn't even fully comprehend. The twist came during the contract discussion. "I notice your corporate filings show significant private investment 2 years ago," Whitfield's lawyer mentioned. $2 million from Wellington Industries. Weren't they former clients of yours, Robert? My father's jaw clenched. "Ancient history. We've moved on to better partnerships." "Like mine." Whitfield's tone was silk over steel. "Of course, you're our priority client." "Interesting, because Martin Wellington speaks very highly of Ms. Blackwood's company, says investing in Ether was the best decision he's made in years." Whitfield turned to me. "He mentioned you have an unusual corporate philosophy about employee equity." I smiled, grateful for the opening. Every full-time employee owns shares. When we succeed, everyone benefits. When we face challenges, everyone's invested in solutions. "Socialist nonsense," my mother muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "Actually," Whitfield said coolly, "it's brilliant. Alignment of interests. something more traditional firms could learn from. The meeting concluded with handshakes and promises of rapid contract execution. My parents lingered, clearly hoping for private conversation with their client, but Whitfield dismissed them with casual efficiency. "I'll need you to coordinate with Ether directly from now on," he told them. "This level of operation requires dedicated attention. I'm sure you understand." They understood perfectly. They were being sidelined in favor of the daughter they'd sidelined. As we packed up, Whitfield approached me privately. "May I ask you something, Ms. Blackwood?" "Of course." "Your proposal lists no advisory board members with the surname Blackwood. Given your obvious expertise, I would have expected family involvement." I chose my words carefully. My investors and advisors were selected based on industry knowledge and aligned values. Family can complicate business. He studied me with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Indeed it can. Thank you for your discretion and professionalism. We look forward to a long partnership." After he left, my team erupted in celebration. We'd done it. We'd won the contract that would transform Ether from successful startup to industry leader. And we'd done it without leveraging family connections or revealing personal history. "Your parents looked like they'd swallowed lemons," Sarah observed gleefully. "This isn't about them," I reminded her. "It's about building something lasting." But privately, I savored the moment. They'd tried to investigate, tried to control, tried to marginalize. Instead, they'd watched their biggest client choose me, based solely on capability. No family name had opened this door. No parental introduction had made this possible. Just 3 years of 18-hour days and relentless focus on excellence. That evening, I received 2 messages. The first was from Martin Wellington. "Heard you landed Whitfield. Proud of you, kid. Sky's the limit." The second was from my mother. "We need to talk about your little company." I deleted the second message. We had nothing to discuss. Everything that needed saying had been said in that conference room, written in contracts, and proven in capability. She wanted to talk about my little company. Let her schedule a meeting with my assistant like any other inquiry. Success on your own terms, I was learning, meant setting your own boundaries, and my parents had just discovered theirs. Dawn broke over Denver International Airport with the kind of crystalline clarity that made pilots smile and passengers reach for cameras. I'd been at the private terminal since 4:30, personally overseeing every detail of what would be the most important flight in Ether Aviation's history. Marcus Whitfield's first journey with us would set the tone for our entire partnership. The Gulfstream G650 gleamed on the tarmac, its hull reflecting the sunrise in sheets of gold. I'd supervise the detailing myself, ensuring every surface sparkled and every system checked perfectly. The interior had been configured exactly to Whitfield's specifications: workspace for 6 sleeping quarters for transoceanic flights, communication systems that could reach any corner of the globe. Caterings loaded, Patricia reported, checking items off her tablet. "The special request items from that French place he likes are in the forward galley. Backup meals are stored per protocol." Newspapers. 6 international editions plus the local papers from every destination city, all pressed and arranged chronologically. Weather. Clear for takeoff. Some convective activity over the Pacific, but Captain Morrison has 3 alternate routes programmed. I nodded, satisfied but not relaxed. In aviation, perfection was the minimum acceptable standard. Lives literally depended on getting every detail right. Easter. Gloria's voice carried across the hangar. "You need to see yourself right now." I glanced down at my appearance. Professional blazer over crisp white shirt, pressed slacks, low heels suitable for tarmac walking. My hair was secured in a neat bun, makeup minimal but polished. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, that's my point." She gestured at my reflection in the aircraft window. "You look like exactly what you are. A successful CEO who knows her business. Own it." She was right. Sometime in the past 3 years, I'd transformed from the uncertain girl seeking approval to a woman who commanded respect. The change had been so gradual I'd barely noticed, but standing on my tarmac next to my managed aircraft, preparing for my client's departure, the evolution was undeniable. Whitfield's motorcade just passed the outer gate. Sarah's voice crackled through my earpiece. ETA 4 minutes. Copy that. All stations prepare for arrival. My team moved with choreographed precision. The red carpet rolled out exactly parallel to the aircraft door. Ground crew took final positions. The co-pilot descended to stand ready for luggage handling. We'd rehearsed this until every movement flowed like water. Second motorcade following, Sarah added. Looks like, oh boy, your parents are with him. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. Of course they'd insert themselves into this moment. They couldn't resist being present for their client's departure, probably hoping to maintain some control over the narrative. The first black SUV pulled up exactly where we'd marked. Whitfield emerged looking every inch the billionaire in a perfectly tailored suit and sunglasses that probably cost more than most people's cars. His assistant followed already on the phone, coordinating something on another continent. Ms. Blackwood, Whitfield greeted me warmly. Magnificent morning for flying. Perfect conditions, Mr. Whitfield. Captain Morrison has your flight plan ready for review and we're cleared for departure at your convenience. The second SUV disgorged my parents, who'd clearly dressed to impress. My mother wore designer everything from her suit to her shoes to the bag that screamed its pedigree. My father had chosen his power broker outfit, complete with the Harvard tie he wore to remind everyone of his credentials. They approached with the kind of forced casualness that fooled no one. Marcus, my father said, clapping Whitfield's shoulder with presumed familiarity. We wanted to see you off personally. How thoughtful, Whitfield replied, his tone neutral as Switzerland. My mother's gaze swept over me, cataloging everything from my modest jewelry to my sensible shoes. Finding nothing to criticize directly, she turned to the aircraft. Such a large plane. Seems excessive for one person. Actually, I interjected smoothly, the G650 is optimally sized for Mr. Whitfield's needs. The range allows non-stop flights to Asia, while the cabin configuration maximizes productivity during travel. Excess would be flying a larger aircraft that burns more fuel without adding value. Since when are you an expert on aircraft? My mother snapped, forgetting to maintain her facade. Since I studied aerospace engineering and built a company around aviation optimization, I replied calmly. Would you like to see the weight and balance calculations? They're quite elegant. Whitfield coughed, possibly hiding a laugh. Perhaps we should proceed with the inspection. I led the group through the pre-flight walkthrough, explaining safety features and amenities, while my parents trailed behind like reluctant students. Their discomfort grew with each demonstration of my expertise. This wasn't their territory, their conference room, their controlled environment. This was my domain. The communication suite can handle encrypted video conferences with up to 12 participants. I explained, showing Whitfield the forward cabin workspace. We've tested connectivity over every ocean and confirmed satellite coverage for your entire route. What about customs arrangements? Whitfield's assistant asked. Pre-cleared at every destination. Our ground teams have relationships with local authorities to expedite processing. Your documentation package is in the leather folder on your desk, arranged by country. My father attempted to reassert relevance. I've made some calls to our contacts in Singapore. They'll be expecting you. That won't be necessary, Whitfield said. Ms. Blackwood's team has arranged everything through proper channels. I prefer to keep business relationships clean. The subtle rebuke landed like a slap. My parents had built their success on leveraging connections and trading favors. Whitfield operated differently, preferring transparent transactions to tangled obligations. Captain Morrison. I called, would you brief Mr. Whitfield on today's flight plan? Morrison descended from the cockpit, every inch the professional aviator in his crisp uniform. Former Air Force, thousands of hours in type, the kind of pilot who inspired confidence before he spoke a word. His briefing was thorough, but accessible, covering routes and alternates without overwhelming with jargon. Any questions, sir? Morrison concluded. Just one, Whitfield said. Why did you leave United Airlines for Ether? Morrison smiled. Because Ms. Blackwood treats her pilots like professionals, not expenses. She invests in training, maintains aircraft to the highest standards, and never pressures us to fly when conditions are marginal. In 20 years of aviation, I've never worked for a better operation. My mother made another small sound of disbelief. The idea that her disappointment daughter had earned such loyalty from accomplished professionals clearly challenged her worldview. We should let you board, my father said, eager to end this display of my competence. Important day ahead. Indeed, Whitfield agreed. But first, I believe there's someone else I should meet. He looked at me expectantly. Understanding dawned. Of course. Sarah, would you ask Miss Harrison to join us? Gloria emerged from the hangar office resplendent in her captain's uniform, despite being officially retired from flying. Her presence commanded instant respect, 4 stripes, earning what money couldn't buy. Captain Harrison. Whitfield extended his hand. An honor. I've followed your career since you were flying 7-4s. The honor's mine, Gloria replied, though these days my greatest pride is mentoring the next generation. She placed a hand on my shoulder. Easter represents everything right about aviation's future. Competent, ethical, innovative. My parents stood frozen watching their dismissed daughter receive praise from titans of industry. This wasn't their carefully controlled narrative. This was reality intruding on their fiction. The moment that changed everything came next. I believe that's everything, I said, preparing to guide Whitfield up the aircraft stairs. Your flight crew is ready when you are. Excellent. Oh, Margaret. Whitfield turned to my mother. I meant to thank you for the champagne you sent. Unfortunately, I don't drink before international flights. Aviation safety, you understand. My mother had been holding a champagne flute from the terminal's executive lounge, apparently planning some sort of toast. Her grip tightened reflexively. Of course, she managed. Perhaps when you return. Ms. Blackwood, CEO. A voice called from across the tarmac. We all turned to see Whitfield's assistant approaching with a photographer from the Denver Business Journal. They're here for the departure photos we arranged. Mr. Whitfield with the aviation team that's making this acquisition possible. Certainly. I agreed, though, we'd arranged no such thing. This had Whitfield's fingerprints all over it. The photographer positioned us with the aircraft as backdrop. Whitfield insisted I stand centrally as CEO with Gloria on one side and Morrison on the other. My parents watched from the periphery as their biggest client posed with their biggest disappointment. Could we get one with the whole executive team? The photographer asked. This is the executive team, Whitfield said firmly. The people who actually make things happen. Click, click, click. Each shutter sound captured a moment my parents couldn't spin, couldn't control, couldn't dismiss. Their failure daughter standing confidently beside their most important client, clearly in charge of an operation they couldn't begin to manage. As we concluded the photos, my mother's champagne glass slipped from her fingers. The crystal shattered on the tarmac with a sound like Breaking Bell's champagne, spreading in a golden puddle that reflected the morning sun. The symbolism was so perfect, I wondered if she'd done it intentionally, but her shocked expression suggested otherwise. Oh, she stared at the fragments as if they held answers to questions she couldn't form. No worries, I said, already signaling ground crew. We're equipped for any situation. Team FOD cleanup priority 1. My crew responded instantly, producing equipment to clear the foreign object debris that could damage aircraft engines. Within 90 seconds, no trace remained of the accident. We'd handled actual emergencies with less efficiency. Impressive, Whitfield murmured. Your team's response time rivals military units. We train for excellence, I replied. In aviation, second best isn't good enough. My father helped my mother step back from the cleanup area, both of them looking suddenly older and smaller against the vastness of the airport. They'd come to maintain control to keep their hands on the steering wheel of Whitfield's journey. Instead, they'd discovered they weren't even passengers on this flight. Mr. Whitfield, I said formally, your aircraft is ready for departure. He ascended the stairs with the confidence of someone who'd traveled the world, pausing at the door to look back. Robert, Margaret, try not to worry. Your daughter has everything under control. The calculated emphasis on your daughter landed with precision. He'd seen their dismissal, understood their denial, and chosen his side based on competence rather than connections. Captain Morrison followed Whitfield aboard, beginning his final preparations. Gloria squeezed my hand before heading to the hangar, leaving me standing on the tarmac with my parents as the Gulfstream's engines began their startup sequence. My mother asked, her voice barely audible over the turbines. How did this happen? 3 years of 100-hour weeks, I answered honestly, building relationships based on trust, delivering excellence consistently, treating people with respect regardless of their title. Everything you taught me not to prioritize. We never, my father began. You're right, you never. Never believed, never supported, never saw who I could become because you were too busy telling me who I should be. I turned to face them fully. But that's okay. Your disapproval taught me to seek approval from myself. Your disappointment freed me to define my own success. The Gulfstream began to taxi its navigation lights, blinking in the morning sun. I raised my hand in farewell to Whitfield, visible in the window, then turned back to my parents. His return flight lands Thursday at 6. You're welcome to attend the arrival, but please coordinate through my office. We have protocols for terminal access. I walked away before they could respond, heading back to the hangar where my real work waited. Behind me, the G650 lined up on the runway, its engines spooling up for takeoff, the sound of pure possibility. Sarah met me at the door with a tablet and a smile. Denver Business Journal's already called. They want an exclusive on the woman running Whitfield's aviation logistics. Schedule it for next week, I decided, after we've proven ourselves on this trip. Your parents are still standing on the tarmac, she observed. I glanced back to see 2 figures growing smaller as the distance between us increased. They looked lost, perhaps finally understanding that their narrative had never been true. I wasn't a disappointment or a failure. I was simply someone who'd chosen a different path to success. The Gulfstream lifted off, climbing steeply into the morning sky. I watched until it disappeared into the blue, carrying with it any last vestige of doubt about my capabilities. Success, I realized, wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about proving myself right. And at 28,000 feet and climbing the view was spectacular. The moment stretched like spilled honey, golden and slow and impossible to take back. My mother stared at the champagne glass fragments scattered across the tarmac, each piece catching sunlight like accusations she couldn't voice. The sound of shattering crystal still echoed between us, a punctuation mark on years of carefully maintained pretense. I'll get you another glass. My father offered mechanically, as if replacement could restore more than just the champagne. No. My mother's voice was hollow. No, I don't think that would help. Ground crew completed their cleanup with practiced efficiency, leaving no trace of the accident except the questions hanging in the morning air. The Gulfstream had disappeared into cloud cover, taking with it Marcus Whitfield and any illusion my parents still harbored about their daughter's little airport job. We should discuss this, my father said, attempting to restore his usual command. Inside, privately. I checked my watch. I have 17 other aircraft movements to coordinate today. If you'd like to schedule a meeting, now Easter. The desperation in my mother's tone surprised all of us. Please. Against my better judgment, I led them to my office. The space that had once been a converted closet was now a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway. Awards lined one wall, photos with clients and crew covered another. Evidence of the life I'd built while they'd been crafting fiction about my failures. My parents sat in the client chairs like defendants awaiting verdict. The role reversal wasn't lost on any of us. 28 aircraft, my mother said, finally studying a fleet photo on my desk. That's what the photographer said. You managed 28 aircraft. 32, actually. We added 4 more last month. 32. She repeated the number like a foreign word. How is that possible? You're 26 years old. 27. You missed my last birthday. I kept my tone neutral, professional. And it's possible because I started at 22 with 1 contract and scaled strategically. But the money, my father began, came from investors who believed in the business model. Martin Wellington, primarily after you lost his account, he appreciated innovation over tradition. My father's jaw tightened at the mention of his former client. Wellington was always impulsive. Throwing money at startups is hardly sound investment strategy. His $2 million initial investment is now worth $18 million based on our last valuation. I'd say his impulse paid off. Silence settled over us like dust. Through the windows, another aircraft began its takeoff roll engines, singing the song of possibility. My parents looked older in the natural light, their carefully maintained facades showing cracks. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother asked finally. I almost laughed. "Tell you what?" "When during the dinners, where you introduced me as between opportunities, the charity galas where you explained I was finding myself, the family gatherings where you held up Stephanie Chen as everything I failed to be, we were trying to protect you," she protested, "from embarrassment, from failure." "No, you were protecting yourselves from having a daughter who didn't fit your narrow definition of success." My desk phone rang. Sarah's voice came through the speaker. "Easter, the Singapore team needs clarification on the hangar arrangements." 5 minutes. "Hi?" I told her, then turned back to my parents. "This is what I do, all day, every day. I coordinate complex logistics that keep powerful people moving safely around the globe. I employ 73 people who depend on me for their livelihoods. I make decisions that affect millions of dollars and countless lives." "But it's not what we planned," my father said, still clinging to old scripts. "Exactly. It's what I planned, what I built, what I earned." I stood signaling the conversation's end. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do." They rose reluctantly, my mother clutching her purse like a lifeline. At the door, she turned back. "That man, Whitfield. He knew, didn't he, about us being your parents?" "He's known for weeks. He researched everyone involved in his acquisition logistics. Unlike you, he judges people on capability, not pedigree." "He said we should be proud," she whispered. He was being polite. Pride requires participation. You can't claim credit for something you actively tried to prevent. The words landed like physical blows. I saw my father want to argue to reassert his authority to somehow reclaim control of the narrative, but the evidence surrounded us. My office, my business, my success, achieved not because of them, but despite them. "Your mother's birthday is next month," he said, finally grasping for familiar ground. "Perhaps you could—" "I'll have Sarah check my calendar. We're launching the Phoenix hub that week, so travel is likely." They left then, walking through my domain like tourists in a foreign country. Employees nodded respectfully as they passed, addressing them as Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, because courtesy was part of our culture. But everyone knew who signed the paychecks, who made the decisions, who'd built this from nothing. Gloria found me an hour later, staring at the runway without really seeing it. "How'd that go?" she asked gently. They genuinely don't understand. In their minds, they're still the successful ones, and I'm still the disappointment who somehow got lucky. Maybe that's safer for them than admitting they were wrong. Maybe. I turned from the window. But I don't need their admission anymore. Whitfield saw the truth. My employees know the truth. Hell, the Denver Business Journal wants to write about the truth. "And you?" Gloria asked. "What do you know?" I considered the question, thinking about the journey from that storage closet to this corner office. The nights spent hungry to save money, the rejections from people who couldn't see past my age or gender, the small victories that accumulated into something undeniable. "I know that I was never a disappointment," I said finally. "I was just different than what they expected, and that difference turned out to be my greatest strength." Gloria smiled. "That's my girl. Now, how about we handle that Singapore situation before it becomes Bangkok's problem, too? The rest of the day passed in controlled chaos. Whitfield's flight progressed smoothly, each checkpoint confirmed by our ground teams. Other clients' movements demanded attention, a medical emergency requiring immediate transport, a weather diversion necessitating quick replanning, the 1,000 details that separated good operators from great ones. My parents' visit had been an interruption, not a disruption. Their revelation changed nothing about my operations, my responsibilities, my reality. If anything, it clarified the distance between who they'd wanted me to be and who I'd chosen to become. That evening, as I finally prepared to leave, Sarah handed me a message slip. "Your mother called. Said she wanted to talk when you have time." Did she say what about? Something about understanding better. Also mentioned she kept the newspaper article about Forbes 30 under 30. I stared at the message, surprised. They'd known about the Forbes recognition and stayed silent. Had they been watching my success from afar while maintaining their fiction about my failure? "What should I tell her if she calls again?" Sarah asked. I thought about the shattered champagne glass, the metaphor too obvious to ignore. Some things once broken couldn't be restored to their original form, but perhaps they could be rebuilt into something different, something honest. Tell her I'll call when I can, but make it clear that any conversation happens on my terms, in my space, acknowledging my reality. Sarah nodded, understanding. By the way, the Denver Business Journal photographer sent over the proofs. You look incredible standing next to that Gulf Stream. Real CEO energy. I looked at the photos on her tablet. There I stood, confident and composed, with Whitfield and my aircraft as backdrop. No apologies in my posture, no uncertainty in my expression. The woman in those photos didn't need anyone's approval or validation. She'd earned her place through merit and persistence. Send one to my parents, I decided. The one where I'm shaking Whitfield's hand, no message, just the photo. Sometimes the best response to years of dismissal was simply evidence of achievement. They could frame it, hide it, or throw it away, but they couldn't deny its existence. The shattered champagne had been an accident, but its symbolism was perfect. The careful facade my parents had maintained was broken, scattered across the tarmac of my success. Whether they chose to acknowledge that reality or continue living in their preferred fiction was no longer my concern. I had flights to coordinate, employees to lead, and an empire to build. The view from the cockpit was much better than from the gallery, and I had no intention of giving up my pilot's seat. The aftermath of the shattered champagne incident rippled through Denver's business community like turbulence through clear air. Within hours, the story had evolved from simple gossip to something approaching mythology. Marcus Whitfield's praise of my operation, combined with my parents' visible shock, created a narrative too delicious for the country club circuit to resist. I learned about the escalation from Tom Martinez during our morning finance review. 3 investment firms have called asking about potential partnerships, he reported, barely containing his amusement. Apparently, everyone wants to work with the company that made Margaret Blackwood drop her champagne. We're not a sideshow, I reminded him. Any partnership discussions get evaluated on merit, not drama. Of course, but you have to admit the timing is fortuitous. We need capital for the Phoenix expansion. He was right. Success in aviation required constant growth, and growth required funding. The irony that my parents' humiliation might facilitate my expansion wasn't lost on me, but I refused to let personal satisfaction influence business decisions. Sarah knocked and entered with her tablet. Your parents are in the lobby. Did they have an appointment? No, they say it's urgent. Something about explaining the Singapore situation. Singapore, where Whitfield was currently negotiating a $12 billion acquisition, where my ground team was orchestrating movements with military precision, where my parents apparently thought they still had cards to play. Show them to conference room B, I decided. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The delay was strategic. Let them sit in the smaller conference room without the impressive view or executive ambiance. Let them understand that dropping by unannounced no longer guaranteed immediate attention. When I entered, they were studying the wall of certifications and safety awards. My mother traced her finger along a framed letter from the Department of Transportation commending our perfect safety record. Her expression suggested she was trying to reconcile these accolades with her mental image of her failure daughter. Robert, Margaret. I used their first names, deliberately establishing professional distance. Sarah mentioned something about Singapore. My father straightened, attempting to project authority. We've been contacted by several of our associates there. They're concerned about Whitfield's choice of aviation provider. Concerned. I settled into my chair, fingers steepled. About our perfect safety record, our on-time performance that exceeds 99%, or our ground team that's been preparing for this operation for 6 weeks. About your experience, my mother interjected. These are delicate negotiations. One mistake could cost billions. Which is why Whitfield chose us. We specialize in high-stakes logistics. Every employee understands that failure isn't an option. But you're so young, she persisted. The people you're dealing with, they expect competence, which we deliver consistently. I pulled up the Singapore operation status on my tablet. Would you like to see our preparation checklist, 6 pages single-spaced, covering everything from diplomatic protocols to monsoon contingencies? They exchanged glances, conducting one of those wordless conversations that came from 3 decades of marriage. Finally, my father leaned forward. We could help, he offered. Smooth the way, make introductions. To whom the Transport Ministry officials we've been working with for 3 years, the hotel managers who reserve entire floors for our clients, the security firms we've vetted and trained. I let the questions hang. We don't need intervention. We need you to stop suggesting we do. My mother's facade cracked. We're trying to protect you. From what success? From embarrassment, from failure, from proving you wrong. The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Through the conference room glass, I could see my employees working diligently, coordinating flights across continents. They trusted me to lead them, believed in the vision we were building together. That faith meant more than my parents' approval ever could. You have to understand, my father said slowly, this is difficult for us. We had plans, expectations. Based on what you wanted, not who I am. We wanted what was best. You wanted what was familiar, what fit your worldview. When I chose differently, you decided I'd failed rather than considering you might be wrong. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Whitfield's team reporting successful completion of the Singapore negotiations. The acquisition was moving forward, facilitated by our flawless logistics. I smiled, which seemed to unnerve my parents further. Good news, my mother asked. The Singapore deal closed. Whitfield's proceeding to Hong Kong on schedule. I stood, meeting ending. So your concerns about our inexperience seem misplaced. Wait, my father commanded. But the authority that worked in his boardroom carried no weight in mine. I have operations to oversee. If you have legitimate business to discuss schedule through Sarah. Otherwise, I need to ask you to leave. They rose reluctantly, my mother clutching her purse like armor. At the door, she turned back. We're still your parents. Biology doesn't grant authority over my achievements. Respect does. When you're ready to offer that, we can talk. I returned to my office to find Gloria waiting with coffee and wisdom. Heard that got intense, she said. They genuinely believe they're helping. That's the worst part. They can't see how their protection was actually sabotage. Fear makes people do strange things. They're afraid of your world because they can't control it. She was right as usual. My parents had built their success on predictable patterns and established relationships. My world of weather variables and mechanical uncertainties, where competence mattered more than connections, terrified them. Patricia knocked and entered. Whitfield wants to video call, says it's important. We established the encrypted connection, Whitfield appearing on screen with Singapore's skyline behind him. He looked tired, but satisfied, the expression of someone who'd won a significant battle. Easter, excellent work on the logistics. My team's raving about your ground support. Thank you, sir. Hong Kong preparations are complete for your arrival. About that, he leaned forward. I've had some interesting calls. Seems your parents have been reaching out to my Asian contacts expressing concerns about my aviation arrangements. My stomach clenched. I apologize. Don't. Their behavior isn't your responsibility, but I thought you should know they're actively trying to undermine your operation. May I ask what they're saying? That you're too young, too inexperienced, too risky, that I should use established providers instead. He smiled coldly. What they don't realize is that every call makes me more certain I chose correctly. Desperation isn't attractive in business. I'll handle it, I promised. I'm sure you will. But Easter, don't be gentle. Business is war, and they fired the first shot. The call ended, leaving me with decisions to make. My parents had crossed from personal disappointment to professional sabotage. That changed everything. What's the play? Gloria asked. First, we document everything. Every call they make, every contact they poison. Build a file. I thought strategically channeling hurt into action. Second, we accelerate the Phoenix announcement. Make our expansion public before they can do more damage. And third, we succeed so completely that their whispers become irrelevant. The next hours passed in a blur of strategic planning. Legal prepared cease and desist letters in case my parents' interference escalated. Marketing crafted press releases announcing our expansion. Operations doubled down on perfection, ensuring nothing could validate my parents' warnings. That evening, I called an all-hands meeting. My entire Denver team gathered in the main hangar, faces curious and concerned. Word traveled fast in aviation, and everyone knew something was happening. I want to address rumors directly, I began. Yes, there are people questioning our capabilities. Yes, they're trying to undermine our reputation. No, I'm not worried. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Know why I'm not worried? Because I've seen what you accomplish every day. Perfect safety record. Industry-leading performance metrics, clients who trust us with their lives and livelihoods. That's not luck, that's excellence. What do you need from us? Captain Morrison called out. What you already give. Professionalism, dedication, proof that we're not just good, we're the best. I smiled at my team. Let the doubters whisper. We'll let our work roar. The cheers that followed could probably be heard in the terminal. These people believed in what we were building, trusted the vision I'd articulated. Their faith was the antidote to my parents' poison. Later, alone in my office as sunset painted the mountains purple, I contemplated the strange turn of events. My parents' attempt to protect their narrative had backfired spectacularly. By trying to undermine me, they'd revealed their own insecurity. By warning about my inexperience, they'd highlighted their ignorance of my achievements. The power had shifted without them realizing it. They still held social position and established wealth, but I controlled something more valuable: the future. Every flight we coordinated, every client we satisfied, every employee we developed added to a foundation they couldn't shake. My phone rang. Sarah, after hours, meant something significant. The Denver Post wants a statement, she said. Someone leaked that Robert and Margaret Blackwood are trying to sabotage their daughter's aviation company. They're calling it Dynasty Drama at 30,000 feet. I almost laughed. Who leaked it? Unknown, but whoever it was included documentation, emails, call logs, the works. Whitfield. Had to be. His way of returning fire on my behalf. Draft something simple, I decided. Ether Aviation Services remains focused on operational excellence and client satisfaction. We don't comment on unfounded rumors or family matters. That's it. That's it. Let our work speak for itself. But privately, I knew this was far from over. My parents had revealed themselves as active opponents rather than passive disapprovers. The war Whitfield mentioned had begun, and I needed to decide how to fight it. The answer came from Gloria, who'd remained after the team meeting. You know what your parents fear most? She asked. Losing control. Losing relevance. You're not just succeeding despite them. You're succeeding in ways they can't understand or replicate. That terrifies them more than any failure could. She was right. My parents could handle a daughter who tried and failed within their framework. They couldn't handle one who succeeded outside it entirely. My achievement invalidated their worldview, and they were fighting to preserve their version of reality. But reality has a way of asserting itself, especially at altitude. And as I watched another Gulf Stream lift off into the darkening sky, I knew which version would ultimately prevail, the one with wings. Thursday arrived with the kind of operational complexity that made me grateful for years of 16-hour days. Marcus Whitfield's return flight from Hong Kong required coordination across 14 time zones, with weather systems, diplomatic clearances, and ground logistics all demanding simultaneous attention. In my pre-dawn office, surrounded by monitors showing global aviation data, I orchestrated what had become a symphony of precision. Typhoon Mangkhut is accelerating, Patricia reported from her station. If it maintains current trajectory, we'll need to depart Hong Kong 3 hours early. Approved. Notify the crew for adjusted showtime. Sarah, contact Whitfield's team about the schedule change. Already on it. Also, your parents are here. I looked up from the weather charts. Here, at 4:30 in the morning. In the executive lounge, they said they wanted to observe the operation. Sarah's expression suggested what she thought of that explanation. Of course they did. After the Denver Post story broke, they'd shifted tactics from undermining to understanding. 3 days of damage control had taught them that attacking my company only elevated its profile. Now they wanted to witness what they'd failed to destroy. Let them observe from the lounge. No airside access without proper credentials. They're asking for a tour. Then they can schedule one through proper channels like any other visitor. Gloria arrived with coffee and battle plans. Whitfield's expecting them on the ramp for his arrival. He specifically requested their presence. A power play. A lesson. He wants them to see what they've been dismissing. I considered the implications. Whitfield orchestrating my parents' education wasn't my preferred scenario, but refusing his request would complicate our relationship. Besides, perhaps witnessing our operation firsthand would finally shatter their illusions. Fine, issue them visitor badges. Restricted access escort required at all times. The morning accelerated into controlled chaos. The Typhoon's advancement required recalculating fuel loads, adjusting crew rest requirements, and coordinating with alternates along the modified route. I moved between stations, making decisions with the rapid precision that came from experience and instinct combined. Easter. Tom called from his financial monitoring post. Wellington just wired another $5 million. Says it's for the Phoenix build-out, but the memo mentions supporting excellence under pressure. Martin Wellington, my first major investor, had been following the family drama with protective interest. His vote of confidence timed to counter my parents' sabotage sent a clear message to Denver's business community: bet against Easter Blackwood at your peril. Through the observation windows, I watched my parents in the lounge. They sat rigidly, my mother checking her phone obsessively, while my father stared at the operation unfolding beyond the glass. They looked out of place among the pilots and aviation executives who used our facilities their formal business attire, marking them as outsiders in this world of flight suits and weather briefings. "Ma'am," Patricia interrupted, "Captain Morrison's requesting your presence for the pre-flight briefing." The briefing room hummed with focused energy. Morrison had assembled his full team co-pilot flight engineer, cabin crew, and ground support leads. Weather dominated the discussion, with the Typhoon forcing decisions about fuel reserves and alternate airports. If Mangkhut speeds up another 5 knots, Taipei becomes unreachable, Morrison stated. I want Osaka added as a backup alternate. That'll require additional fuel, his co-pilot noted. Weight and balance gets critical. Then we reduce catering supplies, I decided. Safety margins aren't negotiable. The team nodded adjustments made without argument. This was how we operated: identify problems, find solutions, execute flawlessly. No ego, no politics, just professional excellence. My parents appeared in the doorway, escort badges prominent on their expensive jackets. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood here for the authorized tour," their escort announced. The room fell silent. My team knew the family history had heard the whispers and weathered the attempted sabotage. Seeing the sources of that drama in our operational heart created a moment of tension. "They can observe," I said calmly. "Don't let it disrupt the briefing." Morrison continued with barely a pause, but I caught the protective glances from my team. These people had watched me build this company from nothing, had trusted me when I was just a 22-year-old with impossible dreams. My parents' presence felt like an intrusion into our sacred space. Fuel calculations confirmed what the flight engineer reported. With Osaka as backup alternate, we're still within limits. "Weather updates every 30 minutes once airborne," Morrison instructed. "This typhoon's unpredictable." "Like running a business without an MBA," my mother muttered, just loudly enough to be heard. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. Gloria stepped forward, 40 years of command presence radiating from her small frame. "Ma'am, operational briefings require absolute focus. If you can't maintain silence, I'll have to ask you to leave." My mother flushed but said nothing more. The briefing concluded with crisp efficiency, everyone clear on their responsibilities. As the room emptied, my parents lingered, clearly wanting private conversation. "That seemed excessive," my father said. "All that discussion for one flight?" "That discussion keeps people alive," I responded. "Every detail matters when you're responsible for souls at 41,000 feet. Souls." My mother's tone dripped skepticism. Rather dramatic terminology for a business. "Aviation isn't just business, it's trust. Whitfield trusts us with his life. That weight shapes every decision we make." They followed me through the operation, watching as I moved from station to station. Ground crew preparing the aircraft with choreographed precision. Fuelers calculating loads to the gallon. Maintenance technicians performing inspections with religious devotion. Each person greeted me respectfully but without ceremony, the easy interaction of a team that worked together daily. "Your employees seem," my mother searched for words, "devoted." "They're professionals who take pride in excellence. When you treat people with respect and give them meaningful work, loyalty follows." We reached the aircraft gleaming in the morning light. The Gulf Stream represented everything I'd worked towards: sophisticated technology, operated with skillful precision. My parents stared at it like archaeologists discovering an impossible artifact. $32 million, my father said quietly. "This aircraft costs $32 million. 34 with our specifications, but we don't own it. We manage it for a consortium of clients who need guaranteed access, much more efficient than individual ownership." "You convinced multiple millionaires to share an aircraft." I showed them the mathematics. Fractional ownership provides 90% of the utility at 30% of the cost. Business is about solving problems, not maintaining traditions. Captain Morrison emerged from his final walk around. "Aircraft's ready, Ms. Blackwood. Weather's holding steady. We're go for early departure." "Thank you, Captain. Safe flight." He tipped his hat and boarded, beginning the startup sequence. My parents watched the ritual of aviation coming alive, navigation lights, blinking engines, spooling up ground crew, performing their synchronized ballet. "I don't understand," my mother said finally. "How did you learn all this?" "By listening instead of talking, by working instead of networking, by accepting that expertise comes from experience, not pedigree." I faced them directly. "By being everything you said I couldn't be." The Gulf Stream began to taxi, its movements precise and purposeful. We stood on the ramp watching it navigate toward the runway. My father cleared his throat. "The Singapore concerns, we were trying to help. You were trying to control. There's a difference. We've always wanted what's best. You've always wanted what's familiar, what's safe, what confirms your worldview." I gestured at the departing aircraft. "This isn't safe. Every flight carries risk, but managed risk, calculated risk, acceptable risk. That's what business really is." The Gulf Stream lined up on the runway engines rising to takeoff power. We watched it accelerate, rotate, climb into the dawn sky. My mother shielded her eyes against the sun, tracking its ascent until it disappeared. "Whitfield trusts you," she said quietly. "He trusts results, perfect safety record, flawless execution, continuous improvement. Those aren't abstract concepts here. They're daily requirements." "We could learn," my father offered, "understand better, if you'd let us." I studied them. These people who'd raised me, supported my body while starving my dreams. They looked smaller on my ramp, their carefully maintained superiority diminished by the scale of what I'd built. "Understanding requires humility," I said. "Admitting you were wrong, accepting that success has many forms. Are you capable of that?" They exchanged glances, conducting another silent negotiation. Finally, my mother spoke. "We'd like to try." "Then start by watching. Observe how we handle Whitfield's arrival. See what excellence looks like when it's not wearing a suit or sitting in a boardroom. Maybe then we can have a real conversation." I left them with their escort, returning to the operation that needed my attention. The Typhoon was accelerating Whitfield's flight, adjusting in real time a dozen other movements requiring coordination. This was my world, complex and demanding, and absolutely where I belonged. From my office, I could see my parents on the observation deck. They stood apart from the aviation crowd, obvious in their otherness. But they were watching, really watching, as my team performed the miracles that had become routine. "Think they'll get it?" Sarah asked, bringing updated weather reports. "Maybe, or maybe they'll just see what they want to see. Either way, we have work to do." The morning progressed with its usual urgency. Whitfield's flight reported smooth conditions despite the typhoon's proximity. Other clients launched and landed, each movement a testament to the machine I'd built. And through it all, my parents observed from their perch, perhaps beginning to understand that their daughter hadn't failed. She'd simply succeeded in a language they'd never learned to speak. Marcus Whitfield's Gulfstream touched down at Denver International Airport at precisely 6:17 p.m., 3 minutes ahead of the revised schedule. I watched from the control room as Captain Morrison executed a perfect landing despite gusting crosswinds that had diverted 2 commercial flights. Excellence under pressure. The Ether Aviation Standard in action. "Ground team positions for arrival," I commanded through the headset. "VIP Protocol Alpha. Mr. Whitfield has a 7:30 dinner engagement downtown." My parents stood on the observation deck where I'd left them, having spent the entire day watching our operation. 12 hours of witnessing precision professionalism and the kind of coordinated excellence that only came from shared purpose. Whether they'd learned anything remained to be seen. "Whitfield's assistant just messaged," Sarah reported. "He wants to meet in your office before departing. Says it's urgent." Urgent in Whitfield's vocabulary meant opportunity or crisis, nothing between. I made my way to the executive suite, pausing to ensure everything was immaculate. The office that had evolved from a converted closet now commanded respect awards, on walls monitors showing global operations, the quiet hum of serious business being conducted. Whitfield arrived 15 minutes later, still wearing the satisfied expression of a successful acquisition. But something else lurked beneath, a sharpness that suggested the real business was just beginning. Easter excellent work on the Asia routing. The Typhoon diversion was masterfully handled. Captain Morrison deserves the credit. He's been flying Pacific routes for 20 years. "Modesty doesn't suit you," Whitfield said, settling into the client chair. "Own your achievements. Speaking of which, we need to discuss something significant." He produced a leather portfolio, extracting documents that made my pulse accelerate. Acquisition papers, contract proposals, the kind of paperwork that changed companies' destinies. "The Singapore deal opened doors I didn't anticipate," he began. "Transportation and logistics are becoming critical differentiators in global business. I'm assembling a consortium to create the world's premier private aviation network. I want ether as the cornerstone. I kept my expression neutral despite the magnitude of his proposition. What kind of structure are you envisioning? Full acquisition initially with you remaining as CEO. 500 million valuation, significant expansion, capital, global reach within 24 months. He leaned forward. This is your company reaching the stratosphere, Easter. 500 million. The number should have seemed impossible for a company I'd started with $300 and desperation. Instead, it felt inevitable. We'd built something valuable. Now the market was recognizing it. I'll need to review terms with my board, I said carefully. Of course. But Easter. This offer comes with a condition. His expression hardened. Blackwood Investment Partners has been managing a portion of my portfolio. That ends immediately. The ultimatum hung between us like turbulence. You're asking me to be party to severing my parents' business relationship. I'm requiring you to choose between their past and your future. They've spent 3 years dismissing your achievements while profiting from my trust. That kind of cognitive dissonance is bad for business. Through the window, I could see my parents still on the observation deck. They looked tired, diminished by a day of witnessing what they'd tried to prevent. Was Whitfield's requirement justice or cruelty? Did it matter? I need 48 hours, I said. 24. This market moves too fast for deliberation. He stood straightening his jacket. Your parents are about to learn what you discovered 3 years ago. Sometimes family isn't supportive, it's suppressant. The question is whether you'll let misplaced loyalty limit your altitude. He left me with documents that could transform everything and a decision that would define more than business. I sat alone watching the sunset paint the mountains crimson, contemplating the price of stratospheric success. Gloria found me there an hour later reading through the proposal's dense legalese. Heard Whitfield made his move, she said, settling into the chair he'd vacated. 500 million valuation, global expansion, everything we've dreamed about. But it requires formally cutting ties with my parents' firm, making the professional separation personal and permanent. Gloria studied me with eyes that had seen too much to judge easily. What does your gut say? That they made this bed with 3 years of dismissal and 3 weeks of sabotage. That business consequences follow business decisions. And your heart wonders if success tastes bitter when served with revenge. She nodded slowly. You know what makes you different from them? You're asking that question. They never wondered if their dismissal hurt you. They just assumed you'd eventually conform or disappear. My desk phone buzzed. Security reporting my parents wanted to see me before leaving. The universe's timing remained impeccable. Send them up, I decided. Might as well have this conversation now. They entered looking haggard, 12 hours of observation having worn through their polished facades. My mother's designer suit was wrinkled, my father's perfect hair slightly mussed. They'd seen too much to maintain pretense. Quite an operation, my father said, attempting normalcy. Thank you. We had no idea, my mother added. The complexity, the precision, the scale of it all. Because you never asked, never visited, never showed interest beyond how it reflected on you. Silence stretched like a runway. Finally, my father cleared his throat. Whitfield met with you. Not a question. Of course they knew. In their world, information was currency, and they'd been monitoring their biggest clients' movements all day. He made a proposal, I confirmed. To acquire your company, my mother's voice cracked slightly, and to end our professional relationship. How did you... He told us, directly. Said he wanted us to understand the consequences of undermining excellence. My father's jaw clenched. He gave us 30 days to transition his accounts. 30 days. More generous than I'd expected, but still a death sentence for their legacy fund launch. Without Whitfield as anchor investor, the entire project would collapse. 3 years of planning destroyed by 3 weeks of poor judgment. You could refuse, my mother said desperately. Tell him family matters more than money. The way you told me that aviation mattered less than your approval, that was different. Explain how dismissing my dreams was different from me accepting the consequences of your choices. They exchanged glances, years of partnership failing to provide answers. My father tried another approach. We're your parents. That has to count for something. It does. It's why I'm having this conversation instead of letting you discover the acquisition in the Wall Street Journal. I stood, moving to the window. But being my parents doesn't grant immunity from business realities. So you'll do it, my mother said flatly. Take his money and watch us fail. I'll make the best decision for my company and employees. If that happens to conflict with your interests, perhaps you should examine why. This is revenge, my father accused. This is business. You taught me the difference, remember all those dinners where you explained that emotion had no place in proper decisions. I faced them. Well, I learned. Ether Aviation has 73 employees depending on me to maximize opportunities. Your investment firm has 12. The math is simple. The math is cruel, my mother whispered. The math is neutral. You're the ones who assigned moral weight to success and failure. By your own definitions, I'm obligated to choose the path of greatest achievement. Gloria, who'd remained silent, finally spoke. Perhaps there's another option. We all turned to her, hope flickering in my parents' eyes. Whitfield wants separation between the firms. He didn't specify Easter had to be the executioner. She smiled slightly. What if Blackwood Investment Partners proactively resigned the account, acknowledged the conflict of interest? Took the high road. We'd still lose the revenue, my father protested. But you'd keep dignity and possibly your daughter. The proposal hung in the air like a held breath. My parents could choose their pride or their profit, the same choice they'd forced on me 3 years ago. If we did that, my mother said slowly, could we, pretend the last 3 years didn't happen, erase the dismissals and humiliations, rewrite history where you supported instead of sabotaged? Start over, she said simply. Try to understand who you've become instead of mourning who you didn't. I studied them, these people who'd given me life, and tried to limit it. They looked older, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. Perhaps watching dreams take flight all day had shifted their perspective on what was possible. Whitfield expects an answer by tomorrow, I said. What you do about his account is your decision. Mine will be based on what's best for Ether, not what repairs relationships. They stood to leave, moving like people carrying invisible weight. At the door, my father turned back. For what it's worth, what you've built here is remarkable. We were wrong to doubt you. After they left, Gloria and I sat in companionable silence, watching night settle over the airport. Lights began twinkling on the runway like earthbound stars guiding aircraft home. Think they'll do it? She asked. Give up Whitfield voluntarily. I think they'll do what they've always done, whatever serves their interests best. The question is whether they've learned to define those interests differently. My phone buzzed with a message from Tom. Preliminary valuation complete. Whitfield's offer is fair, even generous. This is our Apollo moment. Apollo. The mission that proved impossible was just another word for unprecedented. I smiled at the appropriateness, remembering the girl who'd built model rockets and dreamed of touching sky. What will you do? Gloria asked. What I've always done. Make the best decision with available information. Build something lasting. Refuse to let anyone else's limitations define my altitude. Even if it costs you family, they cost themselves family when they chose pride over support. I'm just refusing to subsidize that choice anymore. The night grew deeper, aircraft lights tracing paths through darkness. Tomorrow would bring decisions that changed everything. But tonight, I sat in the office I'd earned, watching the ballet of aviation I'd orchestrated, knowing that whatever came next, I'd face it on my own terms. Success at this altitude required sacrificing old oxygen for new atmosphere. The question was whether my parents could learn to breathe at this height or whether they'd remain ground-bound by choice. Either way, I had a company to run and skies to claim. The stratosphere was calling, and I'd never been afraid of heights. The next morning arrived wrapped in fog so dense that Denver International operated on instruments alone, fitting weather for a day of obscured visibility and careful navigation. I'd spent the night reviewing Whitfield's proposal, running scenarios with my leadership team, and trying to ignore the weight of pending decisions. At 7 a.m. sharp, Sarah knocked with coffee and unexpected news. "Your parents are in the lobby. They have documents that require your signature." Documents. Official resignation from the Whitfield account. "They've been here since 6, waiting for you to arrive." I stared at her, processing this development. They'd actually done it. Chosen dignity over dollars, pride over profit. The same parents who'd spent 3 years prioritizing their narrative over my reality had finally made a different choice. "Send them to the main conference room. I'll be there shortly." The conference room where this journey began felt different now. Morning light filtered through fog, creating an ethereal atmosphere. My parents sat at the far end of the table, documents spread before them like surrender terms. They looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if releasing a burden they'd carried too long. My mother had forsaken her usual power suit for a simple dress. My father's tie was loosened, his armor of formality compromised. "We've resigned the Whitfield account," he said without preamble, effective immediately, cited irreconcilable conflict of interest. I took the document, scanning the formal language of professional separation. They'd been thorough, protecting Whitfield's interests while acknowledging their inability to serve them properly. It was expertly crafted capitulation. "This will cost you millions," I observed. "It's already cost us more than that," my mother said quietly. "We spent 3 years so focused on who you weren't that we missed who you were becoming." "And who's that?" "Someone remarkable. Someone who built what we couldn't envision. Someone who succeeded by every meaningful measure while we clung to meaningless ones." I set the papers aside. "What do you want me to say, that I forgive 3 years of dismissal because you've had one epiphany?" "No," my father interjected. "We want you to know we finally see you. Not our projection, not our disappointment, but you. The woman who orchestrated yesterday's operation, who earned Whitfield's respect, who built something from nothing." "Yesterday was a normal day," I said. "We handle that level of complexity routinely. You're impressed because you finally bothered to look." "You're right," my mother admitted. "We were so invested in our version of success that we couldn't recognize yours. But watching your team, seeing their respect for you, understanding what you've achieved, we were wrong. Completely, devastatingly wrong." Through the window, I watched a cargo plane pierce the fog, trusting instruments over visibility. Sometimes you had to fly blind, relying on internal guidance when external references failed. "There's something else," my father said, producing another folder. "We've been keeping these. Don't ask why. I'm not sure we knew ourselves." Inside were newspaper clippings, magazine articles, printed web pages. Every mention of Ether Aviation, every award I'd won, every milestone we'd achieved. 3 years of accomplishments they'd publicly dismissed, but privately preserved. "You collected these while telling everyone I was a failure." "Cognitive dissonance," my mother said. "We couldn't reconcile our narrative with reality, so we maintained both. Told ourselves we were protecting you while secretly documenting your achievements." "That's," I searched for words, "deeply dysfunctional." "Yes," they agreed simultaneously. Gloria entered with her own coffee and raised eyebrows. "Sorry to interrupt. Whitfield's online. One wants your decision." "Tell him 5 minutes," I decided. She nodded and withdrew, leaving us in fog-shrouded silence. My parents waited, having said their piece. The collected articles lay between us, evidence of their silent witness to my success. "I'm taking his offer," I announced. "Ether Aviation will become part of Whitfield Industries' global transportation network." "Congratulations," my father said, seemingly genuine. "It's a remarkable achievement." "We know this changes everything," my mother added. Your company will go global. You'll relocate, expand, evolve beyond anything we imagined. We wanted you to know we finally understand what we missed. And what's that? A daughter worth being proud of, worth supporting, worth believing in. Tears tracked down her cheeks, smudging makeup she'd probably applied at 5 a.m. We failed you, Easter, not the other way around. The admission hung in the air like the fog outside, obscuring and revealing simultaneously. I'd waited 3 years to hear those words. Now they'd arrived, I wasn't sure what to do with them. Where do we go from here? I asked. That's up to you, my father said. We've resigned the account. We've acknowledged our mistakes. We've admitted the truth. What happens next is your decision. You could have kept Whitfield, I pointed out, forced me to be the one who severed ties. We could have, he agreed, but that would have been perpetuating the pattern, making you responsible for our choices. You deserved better 3 years ago. The least we can do is offer it now. I stood walking to the window. The fog was lifting slowly, revealing the airport's complex geometry. Runways intersecting terminals connected a vast system operating in harmony. Like family, perhaps. Complicated, interconnected, requiring constant adjustment to function. I can't erase 3 years of hurt, I said finally. Can't pretend the dismissals didn't shape me, but maybe we can try building something new. Slowly, carefully, with clear understanding that my life, my company, my choices are mine. We'd like that, my mother said softly, whatever form it takes. Start by seeing the acquisition announcement in the Journal tomorrow. Don't call with advice or opinions. Just witness it, acknowledge it, maybe even celebrate it. We will add, they promised. I returned to the table, signing their resignation documents with swift strokes. For what it's worth, I'm sorry this cost you, Whitfield, but I'm not sorry it forced this conversation. They gathered their papers, preparing to leave. At the door, my mother turned back. Easter. That young woman from dinner, Stephanie Chen. She called yesterday, said she's been following your success, wants to learn from you. I thought you should know she never saw you as a failure. That was entirely our projection. After they left, I called Whitfield, accepting his offer with amendments that protected my employees and preserved our culture. He agreed readily, eager to add Ether's excellence to his empire. Heard your parents resigned my account, he mentioned. Surprising move. They're full of surprises lately. Good. Static people make poor partners. Evolution indicates potential. The rest of the day passed in a blur of legal calls and transition planning. But that evening, I found myself back on the observation deck, watching aircraft pierce the last wisps of fog. Gloria joined me as I'd known she would. So global domination begins tomorrow, she asked. Global excellence, I corrected. Domination implies crushing others. We're about elevation, including your parents. Especially them. They made a choice today that cost them millions but might gain them something priceless. That takes courage I didn't know they possessed. And you? What did you gain? I considered the question, thinking about collected articles and resigned accounts, preserved achievements, and acknowledged failures. Permission to stop proving them wrong. Freedom to just prove myself right. That's a lot to gain from one foggy morning. Every flight starts with releasing the brakes, I said. Maybe it's time we all stopped holding ourselves back. The night fell clear, fog completely dissipated. Tomorrow would bring press releases and public acknowledgement. Ether Aviation's name splashed across business headlines. My parents would read about their daughter's achievement, not with dismissal, but with recognition, perhaps even pride. It wasn't the vindication I'd imagined during those sleepless nights in airport lounges. It was something better, validation that came not from their defeat, but from their growth. We'd all been flying on instruments, trusting invisible guidance through obscured conditions. Now finally we could see the horizon, and it was infinite. 2 weeks after the acquisition announcement, I stood in the Denver Convention Center's ballroom preparing for the Colorado Business Leaders Annual Summit. 500 of the state's most influential executives would gather to hear me deliver the keynote on innovation through adversity. The irony wasn't lost on me that many in attendance had witnessed my parents dismiss me at similar events. 10 minutes to showtime, Sarah said, adjusting my microphone. Your parents just arrived. They're seated at table 3 with the governor's contingent. I'd invited them personally, a gesture toward the tentative rebuilding we'd begun. They'd responded with appropriate distance, neither presuming familiarity nor maintaining complete separation. Progress measured in careful steps. Whitfield's here too, Sarah added. He's brought half his board to hear you speak. The pressure of performing for my new parent company should have been overwhelming. Instead, I felt the calm that came from years of managing complexity at altitude. This was just another flight requiring perfect execution. I reviewed my notes one final time, though the speech lived in my bones now. It told Ether's story without naming my parents, directly focusing on transformation through challenge, rather than vindication through success. Gloria had helped craft it, ensuring the message elevated rather than retaliated. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Easter Blackwood, CEO of Ether Aviation Services and newest member of the Whitfield Industries family. I walked onto stage to thunderous applause, scanning the audience as I approached the podium. My parents sat rigidly at their table, surrounded by peers who'd heard their fiction about my failures. This would be their first public acknowledgement of reality. 3 years ago, I slept in an airport break room because I couldn't afford a hotel. I began. Today, I oversee operations that keep global business moving. The journey between those points taught me that innovation doesn't come from comfort. It comes from constraints that force creative solutions. The audience leaned in, successful people always hungry for origin stories. I gave them truth wrapped in inspiration, sharing the nights of vending machine dinners and the days of 18-hour shifts. But I also shared the breakthrough moments, the first contract signed, the first employee hired, the first perfect flight executed. Traditional wisdom says success requires traditional paths. I continued. Business school, venture capital, family connections. But sometimes the greatest innovations come from those forced to find alternate routes. I caught my father's eye as I said it. He nodded slightly, understanding the reference. They'd blocked my traditional path, forcing me to blaze my own. The constraint had become catalyst. When established aviation companies told us our safety protocols were excessive, we made them our differentiator. When competitors said our employee equity model was unsustainable, we proved that shared ownership creates unshakable loyalty. When wisdom suggested young women couldn't succeed in aviation, we built a company where excellence matters more than demographics. The speech flowed like a well-planned flight path, hitting waypoints of humor and gravitas. I shared specific examples of innovation born from limitation, each story reinforcing that obstacles could become opportunities with the right perspective. 20 minutes in, I reached the part Gloria had suggested including. Sometimes our greatest challenges come from unexpected sources. People who should support us might not understand our vision. Voices that should encourage might instead discourage. When that happens, we face a choice: conform to their limitations or commit to our own possibilities. My mother's hand found my father's on the table. They knew this section was about them, though the audience would interpret it broadly. This was as close as I'd come to public acknowledgement of our history. I chose commitment, not from spite or anger, but from belief that success has infinite forms, that innovation requires deviation, that flying demands leaving the ground, even when those you love prefer you stay earthbound. The audience erupted in spontaneous applause. I waited for it to subside, using the pause to center myself for the conclusion. Ether Aviation now employs 300 people across 6 states. We've flown over 1 million miles with perfect safety. We've proven that constraints can create rather than limit. But our greatest achievement isn't measured in metrics. It's in showing that success doesn't require permission, only persistence. Standing ovation. 500 business leaders on their feet acknowledging a story that resonated with their own struggles against doubt and dismissal. But I only had eyes for table 3, where my parents stood, with tears streaming down their faces. The Q&A session that followed touched on technical aspects of building the business, but also deeper themes of resilience and reinvention. When someone asked about managing family expectations, I paused before answering. Family relationships are complex aircraft requiring constant maintenance. I said carefully, sometimes you need to completely rebuild the engine, but if all parties commit to the work, even damaged planes can fly again. After the session, a receiving line formed. Executives wanting to connect entrepreneurs seeking advice, established players recognizing a new force in their ecosystem. I worked through them professionally, but my attention kept drifting to my parents, waiting at the line's end. Finally, they stood before me. My mother spoke first. "That was magnificent," she said simply. "You took pain and transformed it into power. I've never been so proud or so ashamed." "The shame isn't useful," I told her. "Let it go. Focus on the pride. Build from there." My father cleared his throat. "We've been approached by several firms asking about you, wanting introductions, wondering about investment opportunities. We've told them all the same thing. Easter Blackwood doesn't need our introduction. She's introducing herself perfectly. Though if you ever want strategic advice," my mother added hopefully, "we have some experience with rapid scaling." "I have advisors," I said gently. "What I need are parents, ones who see me for who I am not, who they wanted me to be." "We're learning," they said together. Whitfield approached radiating satisfaction. "Brilliant speech. Exactly why I wanted you in our portfolio. You understand that business is about more than numbers. It's about narrative." "Mr. Whitfield," my father extended his hand. "Congratulations on the acquisition. You've gained something special." "I know," Whitfield replied, "though I suspect you're just now realizing what you nearly lost." The two men regarded each other, former partners now repositioned by my success. Whatever testosterone-fueled tension might have existed dissolved as Whitfield smiled. "Take care of your daughter, Robert, or rather let her take care of herself. She's quite good at it." The evening wound down with photographs and final conversations. As I prepared to leave, I found my parents waiting by the exit. "We'd like to take you to dinner," my mother offered. "Not to talk business or offer advice, just to share a meal with our daughter." I considered the invitation. 3 weeks ago, I'd have refused reflexively. But watching them navigate this evening, seeing them resist every impulse to claim credit or offer guidance, suggested real change was possible. "Okay," I agreed, "but somewhere casual, and you're buying." "Gladly," my father smiled. "We owe you far more than dinner." We ended up at a small Italian place near the airport, the kind of family restaurant where sauce recipes spanned generations. Over pasta and wine, we talked about everything except business. Movies, books, travel plans that didn't involve acquisitions, normal family conversations we'd never really had. "I'm thinking of taking flying lessons," my mother announced suddenly. I nearly choked on my wine. "What? You love aviation so much. I thought, maybe if I understood it better, I'd understand you better." "Mom, you don't have to." "I want to. Fear of flying is just fear of not being in control. Maybe it's time I learned to be a passenger." My father raised his glass. "To new altitudes, for all of us." We clinked glasses, the sound crystalline in the warm restaurant. Outside, planes traced paths through the night sky, following routes I'd helped plan. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new flights, new possibilities. But tonight we were just a family sharing dinner. Imperfect rebuilding, but finally honest about who we were and who we were becoming. The confrontation I'd imagined for 3 years had transformed into something better: reconciliation, based on truth rather than fantasy. "Easter," my mother said as we prepared to leave. "Thank you for succeeding despite us, for showing us what we missed, for giving us another chance. Everyone deserves approach vectors for difficult landings, I replied. Just remember, I'm pilot in command of my own life. Understood, Captain, they said together. As I drove home, I realized the speech had been more than professional triumph. It had been the conversation we'd needed to have witnessed by 500 people who'd ensure my parents could never return to their comfortable fiction. The truth was public now. Their daughter wasn't a disappointment. Never had been. And finally, wonderfully, they knew it too. The following Monday, I convened an unprecedented meeting in Ether's main conference room. My parents sat on one side of the table, my leadership team on the other. Between us lay documents that would define our future relationship. Not contracts in the legal sense, but agreements in the human one. Thank you all for coming, I began. As we integrate with Whitfield Industries and expand globally, it's important to establish clear parameters for all relationships affecting the company. Tom Martinez, my CFO, shifted uncomfortably. Having my parents present for a leadership meeting violated every instinct about separating personal and professional. But that separation had caused 3 years of pain. Time to try integration with boundaries. Robert and Margaret have expressed interest in supporting Ether's growth, I continued. Given their experience in finance and their recent evolution in perspective, I'm open to defined involvement, but only with clear terms. My mother straightened. We're here to listen, not negotiate. Progress. The old Margaret Blackwood would have immediately started managing the conversation. Gloria, serving as unofficial mediator, opened her folder. I've drafted preliminary guidelines based on Easter's requirements and industry best practices. Shall we review? The first section addressed professional boundaries. Any advice or connections offered must flow through proper channels. No direct contact with employees or clients without prior approval. No public statements about Ether without coordination with our communications team. Essentially, I summarized, you can't trade on being my parents. Your involvement must add value on its own merits. Understood, my father agreed. We've spent 3 years trading on relationship rather than value. That ends now. The second section covered personal growth requirements. My parents would attend monthly sessions with an industrial psychologist specializing in family business dynamics. They'd volunteer with youth aviation programs, experiencing the passion they'd dismissed. They'd read specific books on unconscious bias and fixed mindsets. This seems extensive, my mother observed. You spent 3 years building destructive patterns, Gloria replied. Rebuilding requires equal investment. Fair point, my mother conceded. The third section outlined communication protocols, regular check-ins, scheduled but not mandatory. No guilt about missed events due to business travel. No unsolicited advice about personal decisions. Respect for boundaries even when concern felt warranted. Can you live with structured interaction? I asked. Knowing that organic relationship might never fully develop, they exchanged glances, decades of marriage allowing wordless communication. We forfeited organic when we chose judgment over support, my father said. Structure is more than we deserve. Patricia Wong, head of operations, spoke for the first time. What about public acknowledgement? The business community still believes their narrative about you. Section 4, Gloria indicated. Public correction of previous statements. Not self-flagellation, but clear acknowledgement of Easter's achievements and their own misunderstandings. We've already started, my mother said. Every conversation this week, we've corrected the record. It's humbling, but necessary. Humbling is good, I observed. You taught me that failure builds character. Time to test your own philosophy. The meeting progressed through logistics and specifics. My parents asked thoughtful questions suggesting they genuinely prepared. Their old imperious certainty had been replaced by something resembling curiosity. One addition, my father proposed. We'd like to establish an aviation scholarship at CU Boulder for students whose families don't support their dreams. Anonymous funding, but maybe you'd consider being involved in selection. I studied him, looking for angles or attempts at credit claiming. Finding none, I nodded. Send me the proposal, I'll review it. As we concluded, Tom pulled me aside. "You sure about this, letting them back in, even peripherally?" "I'm sure that excluding them entirely perpetuates the dysfunction," I replied. "This way we control the terms of engagement, transform the relationship rather than terminate it." "Very CEO of you," he smiled. "Strategic rather than emotional." But it was emotional. Under the professional framework lay deep feeling, hurt transforming into hope, anger evolving into acceptance. Not forgiveness exactly, but forward movement. My parents lingered after the others left, studying the wall of photos documenting Ether's journey. They appeared in none of them 3 years of absence made visible. "We miss so much," my mother said quietly. "Yes, you did, but dwelling on that serves no one. Focus on what comes next." "Which is," my father asked. "Proving that people can change, that relationships can evolve, that success doesn't require others' failure." I gathered the signed agreements. "You have your terms. Meet them consistently and we'll build something new." They left with homework assignments and hope. I returned to my office to find Whitfield on video calling from London, where he was finalizing another acquisition. "Heard you're giving your parents another chance," he said without preamble. "With strict parameters. Trust but verify, as Reagan said." Wise. Family businesses that ignore family dysfunction always implode. Better to address it directly. He paused. "You know they'll likely disappoint you again. Change is hard, especially at their age." "Maybe, but refusing them the opportunity guarantees failure. This way success is at least possible." "You're more generous than I would be," Whitfield admitted. "Not generous, strategic. They have knowledge and connections that could benefit Ether. If they can deliver value while respecting boundaries, everyone wins. And if they can't, then we enforce consequences, but I won't punish potential for fear of disappointment." After the call, I stood at my window watching planes depart into darkening skies. Each aircraft carried people toward destinations, some certain, others unknown. Every flight required faith that systems would function, that pilots would perform, that physics would cooperate. Rebuilding family was similar. You prepared thoroughly established protocols, monitored constantly, but ultimately you had to trust that properly maintained relationships, like properly maintained aircraft, would carry you safely forward. Sarah knocked with the day's final reports. "Your mother sent flowers." She mentioned indicating an elegant arrangement on the side table. "Card says, 'To new beginnings at any altitude.'" I smiled despite myself. They were learning the language, speaking in metaphors I understood. Small gestures, but meaningful ones. "Oh, and Gloria wants you to know the youth aviation program has its first enrollees," Sarah added. 3 kids whose parents think aviation is impractical. She thought you'd appreciate the symmetry. "Tell her I'll mentor one personally, the one who seems most determined despite least support." Paying it forward. Paying it properly. Someone believed in me when no one else did. Time to be that person for someone else. The evening settled into routine, reviewing flight schedules, approving maintenance allocations, planning tomorrow's complexity. But underneath the usual rhythm lay new harmony. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't building in opposition to my parents, but in cooperation with them. Limited cooperation, bounded by rules and monitored for compliance, but cooperation nonetheless. The terms were set clear as aviation regulations. Now came the test of whether all parties could follow them, whether my parents could transform from obstacles to allies, whether I could release enough hurt to allow their help. Tomorrow would bring the first real test, a joint appearance at the Denver Chamber of Commerce, where my father would introduce me as keynote speaker. His words would either honor our agreement or violate it immediately. But tonight I chose hope over history, chose to believe that people who'd learned to diminish could learn to elevate, that parents who'd failed could still succeed at something simpler but more important than business. They could succeed at seeing their daughter clearly, and maybe eventually that would be enough. 6 months into our carefully structured reconciliation, I stood in the youth aviation program's hangar, watching my mother attempt her first solo flight. The Cessna 152 looked impossibly small against the morning sky, carrying not just one nervous student pilot, but 3 years of accumulated change. "She's doing well," Captain Harrison observed, monitoring the radio. "Steady hands, good instincts. Fears there, but controlled." Through the speakers, we heard my mother's voice call sign November 42 Sierra Papa, requesting clearance for pattern work. The tower responded with routine precision, unaware they were authorizing a minor miracle. Margaret Blackwood voluntarily placing herself in a situation she couldn't control. "Remember your training," her instructor coached through the radio. "Trust the aircraft, trust yourself." I smiled at the parallel. Those same words had guided me through building ether, through navigating success without support. Now my mother was learning their truth at 3,000 feet. My father stood beside me, his own transformation visible in subtler ways. Gone were the perfectly pressed suits and power ties. He wore khakis and an aviation program polo, hands dirty from helping students perform pre-flight inspections. He discovered that teaching financial literacy to aspiring pilots filled something hollow in his chest. "She's been practicing emergency procedures all week," he said quietly. "Stayed up studying weather patterns like they were merger documents." "She's committed," I acknowledged. "We both are. These months, Easter, we've learned more about ourselves than in 30 years of marriage." The Cessna turned base to final, my mother's approach steady, if not smooth. We watched her correct for crosswind adjust power, manage the complex dance of landing an aircraft. The wheels touched down with barely a bounce, centerline discipline maintained. "November 42, Sierra Papa, nice landing, clear to taxi back," the tower confirmed. Inside the cockpit, we could see my mother's shoulders shaking. Tears, I realized. The woman who'd never cried in public was sobbing alone in an aircraft she'd just successfully piloted. "Give her a minute," Gloria suggested. "First solo hits everyone differently." When my mother finally emerged, she looked transformed. Not just from the flight, but from months of mandated growth. The therapy sessions had stripped away layers of defense. The volunteer work had revealed passions she'd suppressed. The books on bias had illuminated blindness she'd cultivated. "I did it," she said, simply accepting my embrace. "I flew alone and survived." "You did more than survive," I corrected. "You conquered." "Now I understand," she continued, "why you love this, why you fought for it. Up there, you're purely responsible. No one to blame, no one to credit. Just you and physics and possibility." "Welcome to my world," I said. The moment was interrupted by Sarah's urgent call. "Easter situation in Phoenix. Weather's moved in fast. We've got 6 aircraft needing immediate rerouting." "On my way," I responded, then paused. Dad want to observe crisis management in action. His eyes lit up. I'd be honored. We raced to Ether's command center, where screens displayed weather radar and aircraft positions. My team was already deep in solution mode, calculating fuel reserves and alternate airports. This was our element, complexity requiring instant expertise. "Phoenix Sky Harbor just went below minimums," Patricia reported. "Tucson's accepting diversions, but filling fast." "What about Prescott?" I asked, pulling up airport data. "Smaller runway, but doable for everything except the Gulf Stream. Route the light jets to Prescott. Hold the Gulf at altitude while we negotiate priority into Tucson." I turned to communications. "Get me their operations manager. Explain we have a medical team aboard needing to reach Phoenix for emergency surgery." My father watched the orchestration with fascination. Information flowed, decisions, cascaded solutions emerged from chaos. Within 20 minutes, every aircraft had safe routing, and our medical team would reach their destination on time. "Incredible," he breathed. "The speed, the precision. It's like watching a trading floor, but with lives instead of dollars." "Lives and dollars," Tom corrected, joining us. "That medical team saves a life, the family flies Ether forever. Reputation is our real currency." Something Blackwood Investment Partners forgot, my father said quietly. We got so focused on returns we lost sight of relationships. The self-reflection was recent enough to still surprise me. My parents hadn't just met the agreement terms, they'd exceeded them. The therapy had evolved from requirement to commitment, the volunteer work from obligation to passion, the studying from assignment to appetite. Easter. Patricia called out Whitfield on line 1, says it's about the London expansion. I took the call in my office, my father following. Whitfield's face filled the screen, Big Ben visible through his hotel window. Easter, excellent work on the Phoenix situation. My team was impressed by the rapid resolution. Standard procedure for us, sir. Which is why I'm calling. London operations need that kind of leadership. I want you here next month for the launch. Bring your key people. He paused, noticing my father. Robert, heard you're teaching financial planning to student pilots. Best students I've ever had, my father replied. They understand that every dollar saved is another hour of flight time. Interesting perspective shift, Whitfield observed, from managing millions to teaching thousands. The thousands matter more when they're someone's dream fund, my father said. After the call, we returned to find my mother in the command center watching the Phoenix operations resolve. She stood beside Gloria, absorbing lessons about weather patterns and pilot decision-making. I could never do what you do, she told me. The responsibility would paralyze me. You just flew solo, I reminded her. That took more courage than anything I face daily. But you face it for others. I only faced it for myself. All courage starts personal, Gloria interjected. Then it expands to encompass others. Give yourself time. That evening we gathered for our monthly dinner. The restaurant had become our neutral ground where family and business intersected without overwhelming either. My parents presented their scholarship recipients, 3 students whose essays about overcoming family doubt had resonated deeply. This one, my mother indicated a young woman's application, reminds me of you. Parents want her to study law, but she dreams of aerospace engineering. We're covering full tuition plus flight training. Anonymous donation, I verified. Of course, though we did include a note saying dreams deserve support, not suppression. Learning from mistakes, my father added. The only useful response to regret. We talked through developments both personal and professional. My mother's progress toward her pilot's license. My father's discovery that teaching fulfilled him more than deals. Their gradual acceptance into my world, not as my parents, but as individuals committed to growth. The London expansion, I mentioned, will mean more travel, longer absences. We understand, my mother said quickly. Your life, your choices. We're grateful for whatever time you can spare. Actually, I continued, Whitfield suggested I bring key people, interested in seeing London not as my parents, but as advisors on the educational component. We're establishing a youth aviation academy there, too. Their faces transformed with surprise and joy. You'd want us involved. If you can maintain boundaries, professional roles only, no managing, no controlling, just contributing where your expertise applies. We'd be honored, they said together. The transformation was remarkable, but not complete. Old patterns still emerged under stress. Control issues surfaced when anxiety peaked, but they caught themselves now apologizing and adjusting. The work was ongoing but genuine. Later, walking to our cars, my mother pulled me aside. I need to say something. These 6 months have been the hardest and best of my life. Hardest because facing our failures hurt beyond description. Best because I finally see who you really are. And who's that? Someone who builds bridges even for those who burn them. Someone who finds strength in service rather than dominance. Someone I'm desperately proud to call my daughter. Mom, I started, then stopped. Words felt insufficient for the moment. I know we can't recover lost time, she continued. Can't undo damage done. But watching you these months, seeing how you lead with competence and compassion, learning from your example, It's transforming us in ways we never expected. That's all I wanted, I admitted. Not perfection, but progress. Not erasure, but evolution. Then we'll keep evolving, she promised. As long as you'll let us. Driving home, I reflected on the journey. 6 months ago, my parents had shattered champagne and illusions on a Denver tarmac. Today, my mother had soloed an aircraft while my father taught dreams instead of destroying them. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete, but it was real. My phone buzzed with a message from the youth program student I mentored. Passed my written exam. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. I smiled, recognizing the echo. Someone had believed in me. Gloria Martin Wellington, my team. Now I passed that gift forward while my parents learned to do the same. The cycle of dismissal had become a spiral of support, rising like aircraft into clearer skies. Tomorrow would bring London planning and Phoenix resolution, the constant complexity of global aviation. But tonight I celebrated transformation. Theirs, mine, ours. The family that had fractured over dreams was rebuilding through shared purpose. Not perfect, not easy, but possible. And in aviation, as in life, possible was all you needed to take flight. 1 year after that pivotal morning at the private terminal, I stood before an audience of 800 at the International Women in Aviation Conference. The Denver Convention Center had been transformed into a celebration of female achievement in aerospace, and I had the honor of delivering the closing keynote. But this wasn't just another speaking engagement. It was a moment of full circle completion. In the front row sat my parents, no longer rigid with discomfort, but relaxed with belonging. My mother wore her newly earned pilot wings on her lapel, 6 months of dedicated training condensed into a small silver symbol. My father sported an Ether aviation pin alongside his youth program instructor badge. They looked different, softer somehow, like stones worn smooth by persistent tides. Gloria introduced me with words that carried extra weight. Easter Blackwood represents everything right about our industry's future. But more importantly, she proves that success doesn't require sacrificing compassion. Please welcome a leader who lifts as she climbs. I took the stage to thunderous applause, scanning an audience filled with familiar faces. My employees who'd trusted a 22-year-old's vision, industry pioneers who'd opened doors, young women who saw possibility in my path. And there, scattered throughout, were the 17 scholarship recipients my parents and I had jointly selected. Dreamers whose families doubted but whose determination soared. A year ago, I began. My parents watched me stand on a tarmac, revealed as someone they'd never bothered to truly see. Today they're here because transformation is possible when pride yields to purpose. I told the story without varnish. The dismissals, the sleepless nights, the shattered champagne that became a shattered facade. But I also shared what came after, the reconciliation built on accountability, the growth born from genuine effort the family reconstructed with intention rather than assumption. Success isn't about proving others wrong, I explained. It's about proving yourself right. But the greatest success comes when those who doubted you transform into those who support you. When broken relationships rebuild stronger because they're founded on truth rather than pretense. The presentation showcased Ether's evolution from desperate startup to global player. We now operated in 12 countries, employed 800 people, and maintained our perfect safety record across millions of miles. But I focused on the human stories. Employees who'd become pilots through our training program, clients whose lives we'd literally saved through emergency medical flights, communities transformed by aviation access. Every flight begins with someone believing it's possible, I continued. Someone fueling the aircraft, someone filing the flight plan, someone saying cleared for takeoff. When conditions align, be that person for someone else. Especially for those whose own families can't see past conventional horizons. I shared how my mother's journey to pilot certification had inspired other executive women to face their fears, how my father's transition from deal maker to dream enabler had shown that identity could evolve at any age, how their scholarship program had already produced 2 commercial pilots and 3 aerospace engineers. But I want to be clear, I said, meeting my parents' eyes. Their transformation doesn't erase the pain they caused. Instead, it transforms that pain into purpose. Every student they support is an apology made tangible. Every dream they enable is a regret redeemed. The speech built to its conclusion, weaving together themes of persistence and possibility. I announced Ether's newest initiative, a global academy providing free aviation training to young women whose circumstances, not capabilities, limited their horizons. Funded partially by Whitfield Industries, but championed by an unexpected source, the Blackwood Family Foundation, my parents' attempt to institutionalize their hard-won wisdom. My parents named me Easter, I concluded. They meant it traditionally religiously, but I've come to see it differently. Easter is about resurrection, yes, but also about renewal. About things that seem dead, proving vibrantly alive. About stones rolled away to reveal empty tombs because what was buried has taken flight. Standing ovation erupted before I finished. 800 women on their feet applauding not just my journey, but their own. In that thunder of recognition, I saw my mother crying openly while my father stood proud without claiming credit, growth evident in their grace. The aftermath brought a receiving line of connections and congratulations. Young pilots thanking me for inspiration, established executives offering partnership, media requesting interviews about the family dynamic that had captured imaginations. But the moment that mattered most came when Samantha Chen approached. Stephanie's younger sister, she'd watched her family hold my parents' approval while I earned their dismissal. Now 18, she stood uncertain at the edge of conversation. Ms. Blackwood, I'm applying to aerospace engineering programs. My parents think I should follow Stephanie into finance, but after hearing your story, would you write me a recommendation letter? Isinta Coris Nanintiro. I'll do better, I promised. I'll fund your education and provide internships at Ether, but only if you promise to pay it forward someday. Her tears of relief and joy reminded me why transformation mattered. Not for the vindication, but for the elevation. Every person lifted created updrafts for others to rise. As the conference concluded, my parents approached with someone unexpected. Marcus Whitfield himself, who'd flown in specifically for this event. Remarkable speech, he said. You've built something special here, Easter. Not just a company, but a movement. She's always been remarkable, my mother interjected. We just needed new prescription lenses to see it. Indeed. Whitfield agreed. Robert Margaret, I want you to know something. When I pulled my business 3 years ago, it wasn't punishment. It was recognition that you were so blinded by conventional success, you couldn't see revolutionary achievement in your own home. I'm glad you've gained sight. Expensive vision correction, my father admitted, but worth every penny lost. We stood in a circle that would have been impossible a year ago. The billionaire who'd bet on me, the parents who'd bet against me, and me who'd bet on myself when no one else would. The geometry of redemption mapped in human terms. What's next? Whitfield asked. Now that you've conquered aviation and family dynamics, space. I said simply, commercial space transportation. The infrastructure's developing, but logistics remain chaotic. Ether's perfectly positioned to organize that chaos. Space. My mother laughed. Of course. Why would our daughter think small? Actually, my father added, I've been researching orbital mechanics for the youth program. Fascinating field. If you need investors who understand both finance and physics, we'll talk, I promised. Because we could now. Because they'd earned the right to dream alongside me rather than despite me. As the convention center emptied, I found myself on a balcony overlooking the Denver skyline. The mountains stood purple in fading light, permanent witnesses to temporary struggles. Gloria joined me, as I'd known she would. Full circle, she observed. From dismissed daughter to industry leader. From family fracture to intentional repair, you've piloted quite a journey. We all have, I corrected. You taught me that rising doesn't require others falling, that success tastes better when shared than when hoarded. What about forgiveness? She asked gently. Have you truly forgiven them? I considered the question watching planes trace paths across darkening sky. I've forgiven who they've become, who they were. That pain shaped me. I can't forgive it away without losing part of myself, but I can transform it into fuel for lifting others. Wisdom beyond your years, Gloria smiled. Though I suppose you've lived multiple lifetimes in these few years. My phone buzzed with a message that made me smile. Cleared for takeoff on night cross country. Wish me luck. Mom. My mother, who'd spent 53 years with feet firmly planted, was flying solo through darkness. If that wasn't proof of transformation's power, nothing was. Ladies and gentlemen, I said quietly, practicing words I'd speak tomorrow. This is your captain speaking. We're expecting smooth skies and unlimited visibility for our journey ahead. Thank you for choosing to fly with us, and remember, the only altitude limit is the one you accept. Gloria squeezed my shoulder. Amen to that, Captain. Amen to that. The night deepened, city lights twinkling like runway markers guiding travelers home. Somewhere above, my mother navigated by instruments and instinct, proving that courage has no expiration date. Below, my father prepared lessons for tomorrow's dreamers, paying forward what he'd learned through loss. And me, I stood between earth and sky, grateful for every moment of the journey. The girl who'd slept in airport lounges had built an aviation empire. The daughter dismissed had become the leader celebrated. The family broken had rebuilt with intention and truth. But most importantly, the dream deferred had taken wing, and from this altitude, the view was infinite. As I left the balcony heading home to prepare for tomorrow's challenges, I passed a young woman studying an aviation textbook in the lobby. She looked tired, determined, alone. I recognized the expression. I'd worn it for 3 years. "Excuse me," I said, stopping. "Are you a pilot?" "Trying to be," she replied. "My family thinks I'm crazy. Says girls don't fly planes." I smiled, pulling out my business card. Mine said the same thing. "Call me Monday. Ether Aviation has a training program for people whose families underestimate their horizons." Her eyes widened as she read the card. "You're Easter Blackwood. I just watched your speech online. You're why I'm here." "Then let's make sure you get where you're going," I said. "The sky's big enough for all of us." I left her clutching possibilities, another link in the chain of lifted dreams. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new flights, new chances to transform dismissal into determination. But tonight, I celebrated the fullness of circles completed and cycles broken. My name was Easter Blackwood. I was 29 years old. I ran a global aviation company that started with nothing but nerve. And I had learned the greatest truth of all. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving that transformation is possible. For individuals, for families, for anyone brave enough to leave the ground and trust their wings. The sky wasn't the limit. It was just the beginning. If you've ever been told your dreams were too big, your goals too ambitious, or your path too unconventional, I want you to know something. Those voices are just turbulence. They shake you. Scare you, might even make you question your flight plan, but they can't ground you unless you let them. Family doubt hurts differently than stranger skepticism. It cuts deeper because it comes from those who should be your ground crew, not your obstacles. But here's what I learned sometimes. The greatest gift our doubters give us is forcing us to develop unshakable self-belief. What dream are you deferring because someone said it was impossible? What transformation are you postponing because the journey seems too long? What heights are you avoiding because someone convinced you that you're afraid of flying? Share your story in the comments below. Tell us about the moment you chose to bet on yourself despite the odds, or tell us about the dream you're still gathering courage to pursue. This community exists to be the support system many of us lacked. If this story resonated with you, please like and share it with someone who needs to remember that their wings are stronger than others' doubts. Subscribe to hear more stories of transformation and triumph of ordinary people, achieving extraordinary things simply by refusing to accept limitations others placed on them. Thank you for flying with me through this journey. Thank you for witnessing that families can transform, that success has infinite forms, and that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's revelation. Remember, you weren't born to stay grounded. You were born to soar. The question isn't whether you can fly, it's whether you're ready to give yourself clearance for takeoff. Blue skies and tailwinds to all of you. May your journeys be smooth, your landings be soft, and your dreams take flight on wings of your own making. This is Captain Easter Blackwood signing off. See you in the clouds.